Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception. That's not just advice. It's a brutal truth about power. And if you've spent enough time in boardrooms, battles of influence, or navigating life's unseen power plays, you know this. The most dangerous moves are the ones no one sees coming. Welcome to 3 hours of ruthless power lessons from Machiavelli. This isn't about empty philosophy or feel-good ideas. It's about raw, strategic wisdom, born from centuries of political survival and mastered by one of the sharpest minds in history. Whether you're leading a team, managing conflict, or simply trying to stay ahead in a world that rewards cunning over kindness, these lessons will challenge how you think about control, loyalty, and leadership. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and let us know in the comments which philosopher you want us to break down next. Use people's weaknesses to your advantage, but never reveal your own. One of Machiavelli's most brutal yet brilliant principles is this: everyone has weaknesses, and the wise strategist identifies them quickly. But just as critical, perhaps even more, is never exposing your own. Power isn't just about how strong you are, it's about how vulnerable others perceive themselves to be compared to you. And that's where this lesson unfolds. Think about the environments where power plays out: corporate boardrooms, political campaigns, family inheritances, even church committees. What gives someone leverage? Not always skill. Often it's their understanding of what others fear, what others crave, or what they're trying to hide. Machiavelli observed that the average person, regardless of social class, has something they guard: insecurity, ambition, guilt, vanity, jealousy, or the desperate need for approval. These are not flaws. They are handles, levers you can pull if you're smart enough to notice them. Let's make this practical. Say you're negotiating a deal. You sense the other party is insecure about their reputation. You don't attack that directly. Instead, you compliment them strategically. You subtly position your offer as one that enhances their image, their standing. You play to their weakness. They'll chase the illusion you offer, and you get the upper hand. Now, flip the coin. The fastest way to lose leverage is to let others see your own weak points. Show them you're emotionally reactive, or that you're desperate for approval, or too trusting, and someone sharper will use it against you. They'll push your buttons. They'll manipulate your empathy. They'll position you into choices that benefit them while you think you're doing the right thing. This doesn't mean being a cold-hearted villain. It means being aware. The world rewards those who understand human nature, not those who pretend it's all sunshine and fairness. Machiavelli's brilliance lay in stating plainly what most people try to deny. If you expose your wounds, the world won't heal them. It'll exploit them. So the strategy is twofold: observe and conceal. Observe others with quiet intensity. Listen when they talk about themselves. Watch what makes them uncomfortable, what topics they avoid, what causes them to boast or shrink. On the flip side, speak little of your own weaknesses. Joke about your minor flaws if you must, but never hand over ammunition. As you master this balance, you'll notice something. The people around you will start revealing themselves without realizing it. And you'll have a toolkit of insights, of influence that's far more powerful than titles or money. Because the real game of power isn't played with force. It's played with information. Use theirs. Guard yours. Appearing virtuous is more important than being virtuous. To the modern mind, especially in an age of public relations, this idea feels eerily familiar. It's not what you are, it's what people think you are. But Machiavelli said it first, and more bluntly. The appearance of virtue matters more than actual virtue. Why? Because most people don't look beneath the surface. They don't follow leaders around with moral microscopes. They judge character based on presentation, symbolism, and narrative. So, if you want to hold power, or simply stay influential, you must control how you're perceived, even if the reality is far messier. Take a moment and think about political leaders, CEOs, or public figures. The ones who endure are rarely the most honest or morally flawless. Instead, they are the ones who maintain a consistent, calculated image. They appear just, they appear disciplined, they appear fair, and even when they aren't, people forgive them because their public story supports the illusion of virtue. Machiavelli, writing in The Prince, made it clear, being good is fine if it helps you maintain control. But if true virtue makes you weak, if it costs you power, you must be willing to compromise. The wise ruler acts morally when it's profitable and appears moral when it's necessary, but never at the expense of survival. He even compared a leader to a chameleon, one who adapts to the climate while looking unchanged. You can lie, deceive, betray, but if you smile while doing it, if you cloak your ambition in values, you'll go further than someone honest but clumsy. Let's take this to the everyday level. In business, someone who looks dependable, courteous, and polished will be trusted, even if their private motives are ruthless. The person who wears their raw ambition or ethical confusion on their sleeve might be more transparent, but they'll be sidelined for seeming unstable or threatening. It's no surprise, then, that Machiavelli encouraged leaders to invest in optics. Do charitable acts, speak of justice and fairness, promote family values, humility, and service, but behind closed doors, make decisions that preserve your position, even if they contradict those very values. It sounds hypocritical, but it's an ancient strategy. This isn't a license to be evil. It's a reminder, don't be naive. In the real world, appearances create belief, and belief creates loyalty, or fear, or both. If you're perceived as good, people lower their defenses. They open doors. They trust you with power. And that power can be used for good or otherwise, depending on your aims. So manage your image carefully. Be deliberate with your words. Align yourself with symbols of virtue. But above all, don't confuse appearing good with being good, because in the game of influence, perception is power. Strike fear before love. Fear lasts longer. Niccolo Machiavelli's most famous assertion, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both," wasn't just a cold, calculated take on leadership. It was a reflection of his hard-earned understanding of human nature. Love, he observed, is conditional. It's dependent on loyalty, shared values, and often circumstances outside of your control. But fear? Fear is dependable. It stays with people. It governs behavior, especially in uncertain or volatile situations. Why does fear work? Because it triggers survival instincts. When people fear consequences, they are less likely to betray, undermine, or disobey. Fear creates boundaries where love often assumes trust. And for someone in power, whether in politics, business, or personal dynamics, control is more easily maintained when people are cautious around you. This doesn't mean cruelty or violence. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for sadism. He made a clear distinction between fear and hatred. The goal isn't to be hated. That leads to rebellion. The goal is to command respect through consequence. For example, a CEO who is loved may be adored for their vision, kindness, and generosity. But if they can't make hard calls, like firing underperformers or restructuring teams, they will lose authority. In contrast, a leader who is calm but unflinching, who enforces rules strictly but fairly, will often be respected more, even if not warmly loved. Fear lasts longer because it imprints itself deeper. People remember what happens when they cross a line. They internalize it. And in the long run, consistency in applying that fear-based respect creates structure and predictability, two ingredients essential for sustaining power. This principle applies at every level. In negotiations, showing you are not afraid to walk away creates tension. In managing teams, setting clear expectations with firm consequences builds reliability. In personal relationships, being too eager to be liked can invite exploitation. So how does one strike fear before love without becoming a tyrant? The answer is precision. Be clear, be direct, and most importantly, be consistent. People fear unpredictability and strength. If your boundaries are visible and your enforcement of them is unwavering, you won't need to raise your voice. Your presence alone will carry authority. Fear, wielded wisely, is a shield. Love, on the other hand, is a favor. And as Machiavelli wrote, people will offer love while it suits them, but will act out of fear when it matters most. Never waste a crisis. Chaos is fertile ground for control. Machiavelli was a master of realpolitik, the belief that politics should be governed by pragmatic, realistic approaches rather than ideals. At the heart of this philosophy is a deep understanding of crisis. Where others see danger, Machiavelli saw opportunity. Crises break routines. They shake foundations. They dismantle systems and create uncertainty. And that's exactly why they are the perfect moments to seize control or make bold moves. During a crisis, people are looking for answers, direction, and safety. This makes them far more open to authority, structure, and even radical change. Take history as an example. The rise of strong leaders often coincides with periods of disorder. When systems collapse, be it economic, political, or social, those who move swiftly to provide solutions or restore order gain immense influence. The key is not to cause chaos, but to recognize its value when it appears, and to act decisively while others hesitate. This concept also plays out in modern contexts. In business, when a competitor collapses or a market crashes, those who act fast, buying assets, reorganizing teams, shifting strategy, can leap ahead. A weak leader freezes in a storm. A Machiavellian one uses the wind to change direction. A crisis is also a moment when rules can be rewritten. People are less likely to resist structural change when they feel vulnerable. That's why wartime governments expand powers. That's why companies introduce sweeping policies after public scandals. People tolerate more from leadership when they believe the alternative is chaos. However, Machiavelli would warn that this power must be exercised wisely. Crisis is a tool, not a weapon. Abusing it or creating it deliberately invites backlash. But when a real crisis appears, a true strategist is ready, not just to survive it, but to shape the future with it. In a personal context, the same principle applies. A family in turmoil, a relationship under stress, or a friend group fractured. These are moments where you can either fade into the background or step up and redefine the narrative. People remember who led them through the storm. Chaos is not to be feared, it's to be understood. It is fertile ground because it clears the weeds of comfort and complacency. In that open soil, the seeds of new power can be planted by those brave enough to act while others wait. If you must betray, do it quickly and never twice. Betrayal is a taboo in most cultures, but Machiavelli stripped away moral niceties to get to the raw mechanics of power. In his world and in many real-world arenas, loyalty is fluid, alliances are temporary, and sometimes betrayal is not only justified but necessary. However, the cost of betrayal is high. That's why Machiavelli didn't advocate betrayal lightly. His point was, if you must do it decisively and only once. Why is speed so important? Because hesitation weakens the betrayal's effect and increases the danger. If you drag it out, the target might retaliate. Others might lose trust in your competence, and your power might erode. A clean, quick betrayal sends a message. You're capable, you're strategic, and you're not to be trifled with. But why only once? Because repetition creates reputation. Betray once, and people will justify it, maybe even admire it if it was done skillfully. But betray twice, and you become untrustworthy. No one will work with you, no matter how powerful you seem. Even Machiavelli knew a ruler needs allies, and allies require a sliver of faith to cooperate. A consistent betrayer eventually stands alone, and that's when power vanishes. The historical examples are abundant. Think of Julius Caesar's assassination, betrayal born out of fear that he had grown too powerful. The conspirators acted quickly, but the result backfired because the betrayal was not decisive enough to restore the old republic. The lesson? Even betrayal must serve a clear strategic end. In business, betrayal might look like undercutting a partner, replacing a co-founder, or backing out of a deal. If done after careful calculation and for long-term gain, it can be a pivot point toward power. But do it sloppily, or worse, make it a habit, and you're seen as unstable, unpredictable, and ultimately expendable. Even in personal dynamics, this idea holds. If a relationship becomes toxic, or someone poses a threat to your well-being or goals, cutting ties might be a form of betrayal. But dragging it out or being vague about your intentions only creates drama and distrust. Clarity, followed by swift action, preserves your position and reduces collateral damage. Machiavelli's point wasn't to celebrate betrayal. It was to control it. It's not about backstabbing everyone in sight. It's about recognizing when a shift in loyalty is the only way forward, and having the courage to execute it without hesitation. In the ruthless game of power, betrayal is a tool, not a habit. Use it once, use it well, and never make it your signature move. Keep your intentions hidden until the moment of execution. In The Prince, Machiavelli doesn't just suggest cunning as a strategy, he demands it as a necessity. One of his most powerful and enduring principles is the idea that intentions must be hidden until the moment of execution. Why? Because in the world of power, the moment you reveal your cards, you give others the chance to counter, resist, or betray. To truly understand this philosophy, consider the idea of political camouflage. When leaders telegraph their plans too early, whether in politics, war, or business, they give rivals the time to gather opposition, sow distrust, or dismantle the strategy before it even begins. Think of this like a game of chess. A grandmaster doesn't explain their strategy after the opening move. They bait, they feint, and only when the final combination is unstoppable do they reveal the full plan. Machiavelli lived in a time of political chaos. Italy was divided, backstabbing was common, and alliances could turn on a dime. He observed firsthand that the prince who speaks too freely often dies too early. People are motivated by fear, envy, self-interest, and if your plans suggest a shift in power, a loss for someone else, or a new order entirely, you will become a target before you've taken your first step. But this isn't just a rule for Renaissance rulers, it applies today just as sharply. In the business world, imagine announcing a company merger too early. Competitors will exploit the chaos. Employees may panic. Stockholders might revolt. But when you keep intentions hidden, only revealing them when every piece is in place, you control the timing, the narrative, and the outcome. This principle isn't about deceit for its own sake. It's about discipline. Machiavelli understood that silence can be strength. Every time you speak about your intentions, you dilute their power. You invite speculation, resistance, and sabotage. That's why the master of power moves quietly, waits patiently, and only strikes when the success is nearly guaranteed. Take, for example, Julius Caesar, whose plans to march on Rome were kept secret until the Rubicon was already crossed. Or in the corporate world, Steve Jobs unveiling the first iPhone after years of secret development. No leaks, no early reveals, just a powerful, game-changing execution. In both cases, secrecy was not weakness, it was dominance. For those in their 40s, 50s, and beyond, those who've lived through decades of office politics, shifting alliances, and hard-earned lessons, this principle may hit close to home. You know the cost of speaking too soon, of showing your hand to people who smile to your face but sharpen knives behind your back. So remember Machiavelli's warning: keep your mouth shut and your plans closer. Only speak when speaking cannot be undone, and only move when the game is already won. Power is taken, not given. Another cornerstone of Machiavelli's philosophy is the idea that power is never given, it is taken. In modern society, this can sound aggressive, even unkind. But if you've worked in leadership, politics, or even family dynamics, you know this to be true. Real power isn't handed out like a reward. It's seized, often through risk, determination, and relentless pursuit. Machiavelli believed that power structures are inherently defensive. Those in power rarely give it up willingly. They build systems to preserve their dominance, and they resist disruption at all costs. So when someone climbs the ladder, gains influence, or asserts authority, it's rarely because someone else offered it. It's because they took it, by force, strategy, or manipulation. This isn't about tyranny. It's about reality. Machiavelli saw that waiting for permission meant waiting forever. A prince who begs for favor or waits for an invitation will be crushed by the more decisive rival. The one who takes initiative, who isn't afraid to seize opportunity, wins. Look around at today's world. Promotions don't always go to the most qualified. Influence doesn't always rest with the most moral. It goes to those who know how to position themselves, how to assert, how to claim space. In politics, it's the candidate who controls the narrative, not necessarily the one with the best policies. In the workplace, it's often the bold, not the diligent, who rise. For many in the 40-60 age group, this rings especially true. You've lived long enough to see talent overlooked, effort unrewarded, loyalty dismissed. You've watched as more aggressive personalities rise, while more competent people stay behind. Machiavelli would say, this isn't failure, it's reality. Power favors the taker, not the waiter. Historical examples are everywhere. Napoleon didn't wait for someone to crown him. He crowned himself emperor. The Medici family clawed their way into rule, not by request, but by force and cunning. In America, the Founding Fathers didn't ask for permission. They declared independence, knowing it could cost everything. And on a more personal level, how often have you seen people lose opportunities because they hesitated, because they thought someone would notice their effort and reward them? Machiavelli's lesson is simple. The world doesn't operate on fairness, it operates on power. But this doesn't mean chaos or cruelty. It means understanding that if you want something, position, respect, freedom, you have to claim it. It means shedding the belief that good things come to those who wait, and embracing the idea that good things come to those who take. In Machiavelli's world and ours, the most dangerous man is the one who understands this law and acts on it, calmly, strategically, and without apology. The ends justify the means. If you win, no one question how. This is perhaps Machiavelli's most controversial and most misunderstood lesson. When he says, the ends justify the means, what he's really saying is that in the ruthless game of power, outcomes matter more than optics. In a world where results define legacy, the tactics used to get there often fade into the background once victory is secured. Think of the leaders who shaped history, not the ones praised for being kind, but the ones remembered for changing the game. They weren't always liked. They weren't always ethical, but they won. And once they won, the narrative became theirs to control. To Machiavelli, morality in politics, or leadership in general, is a luxury, not a necessity. He believed that those who cling to virtue in the face of realpolitik often end up as footnotes in history, not the authors of it. He wasn't telling you to be evil. He was telling you to be effective, even if that means making difficult, morally ambiguous decisions. Take Abraham Lincoln, for example, a man known for ending slavery and preserving the Union. But he also suspended habeas corpus, jailed political enemies, and made strategic compromises that some found shocking. Yet today, he's revered. Why? Because he won the larger battle. He preserved the nation. The methods, while debated by scholars, rarely affect the public's admiration for him. Or consider corporate leaders. A CEO might cut 20% of the workforce, outsource operations, or strong-arm a competitor out of a deal. In the moment, those moves might appear cold or ruthless. But if it leads to higher profits, market dominance, or long-term survival, the boardroom applauds. Shareholders don't care about the suffering if the stock rises. Victory erases the scars left behind. Machiavelli's wisdom hits hardest when you realize this isn't about being heartless. It's about being clear-eyed. People will say they value integrity, but they reward success. If your method brings results, those same people will forget the path you took. Or worse, they'll start copying it. But here's the twist. This lesson also demands accountability. If you fail, you don't get the privilege of explanation. You don't get to justify your ruthless methods if the outcome isn't success. So, if you're going to play this game, you better be damn sure you win. Because power forgives the victor, but it buries the fool. For people in their 40s to 60s, especially those who've weathered the politics of careers, families, and shifting social dynamics, this lesson resonates deeply. You've seen how idealism can be punished and pragmatism rewarded. And maybe, just maybe, you've come to realize that getting what you want often means letting go of how others think you should get it. Never rely entirely on allies. They'll turn on you when it serves them. Machiavelli saw alliances not as bonds of trust, but as tools of convenience. He argued that no matter how close your allies seem, when their interests shift, so will their loyalty. And if you're not prepared for that betrayal, you're already halfway defeated. Alliances, whether in politics, business, or personal life, often start with shared goals. But over time, goals evolve. Resources shrink. Power shifts. And when that happens, your trusted ally might realize that your failure benefits them more than your success. History is full of such betrayals. Think of Julius Caesar and Brutus, once close, yet Brutus helped orchestrate Caesar's assassination. Why? Because aligning with Caesar no longer served his vision for Rome. Or take World War II. The U.S. and the Soviet Union were allies against Nazi Germany. But the moment that war ended, the Cold War began. Their interests collided. The alliance shattered. Machiavelli's advice: use alliances, but never depend on them. Build your own strength. Develop independent sources of power, money, influence, loyalty, or leverage, so that even if allies defect, you don't collapse. In a modern context, think about corporate partnerships. Two companies merge to gain market share. At first, everything aligns, but the moment one sees an edge, an opportunity to acquire, undercut, or dominate, the partnership can dissolve overnight. Anyone who has managed high-stakes negotiations knows this. The friendliest handshake can hide the sharpest knife. Even in personal relationships, especially in midlife, people learn this the hard way. A friend might support you when it's easy, but disappear when standing by you costs them something. Colleagues back you until your promotion threatens their spot. These aren't signs of moral failure. They're reflections of Machiavellian truth. People act in their own interest first, always. Machiavelli doesn't say avoid alliances. He says enter them with open eyes. Understand what your allies need. Predict when those needs might change. Prepare for the moment they become competitors. And never give them control over the core of your power. This mindset might sound cynical, but to the seasoned, it's reality. Those between 40 and 60 have lived long enough to watch loyalties shift, relationships fade, and promises break. And in many cases, it wasn't out of malice. It was just self-interest, rearing its head. If you want to lead, survive, and thrive in a complex world, build structures that don't rely on faith in others. Count on your allies while preparing for the day they leave. That's not distrust. That's wisdom. Flatter publicly, manipulate privately. To Machiavelli, power is not just about strength. It's about perception. People want to feel respected, admired, even loved. And the easiest way to give them that feeling is through public flattery. But behind closed doors, that's where real power moves are made. This dual strategy plays on human nature. Most people, even the powerful, are hungry for praise. Tell someone they're wise, noble, or necessary, and they'll often drop their guard. They'll trust you more. They might even promote you or protect you. But behind that praise, you must keep your goals clear and your tactics sharper than ever. Let's be clear, this isn't about lying for the sake of manipulation. It's about strategic communication. If telling someone they're the smartest person in the room gives you influence, and you then use that influence to achieve a greater goal, Machiavelli would call that smart leadership, not deceit. Consider how diplomats operate. In front of the cameras, it's all smiles, compliments, and mutual respect. But in private rooms, deals are cut, threats are made, and advantages are seized. The public performance keeps everyone calm. The private maneuvering determines the future. Or look at corporate life. You may praise a senior executive for their vision during a company town hall. Meanwhile, you're building a quiet coalition to redirect resources, block a failing strategy, or pivot the organization under their nose. If it succeeds, they might even think it was their idea. If it fails, you're protected because you flattered rather than challenged them. This approach isn't just about being sly, it's about protecting your position. Public conflict breeds enemies. Private manipulation breeds results. Machiavelli understood that open confrontation is risky. But quiet influence? That's where control lives. For the 40, 60-year-old listener, this lesson hits especially hard. You've likely had to smile at people you didn't trust, praise someone you disagreed with, or navigate a workplace where diplomacy mattered more than honesty. You've learned that raw truth isn't always welcome, and sometimes survival depends on how you say things, not just what you say. Machiavelli doesn't tell you to become a fraud. He tells you to become strategic. Flatter the right people. Make them feel safe, important, admired. Then, in the background, shape the world as you need it to be. Those who rely only on honesty might win a few hearts, but they rarely keep power. And in a world where perception shapes reality, being loved publicly while pulling the strings privately isn't just smart. It's Machiavellian. People are more loyal to appearances than to truth. Machiavelli understood a timeless truth. People are drawn not to what is, but to what seems. This insight lies at the heart of power and perception. He observed that in politics, leadership, and even in personal relationships, appearances are often more influential than reality. Why? Because most people don't take the time, or have the courage, to look beneath the surface. They judge quickly, relying on signals, status, and symbolism instead of substance. To Machiavelli, this wasn't cynicism, it was realism. Let's break this down. In The Prince, he wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." This line captures a brutal but accurate portrait of how society functions. People don't care about your intentions or the complexity behind your decisions. They care about what your actions signal to the outside world. Leaders who spend too much time explaining the truth, trying to justify their every decision, often lose credibility. Why? Because perception moves faster than explanation. The truth is slow, nuanced, and often unpopular. Appearances are immediate, digestible, and emotionally satisfying. A strong leader knows this and crafts an image that inspires confidence, strength, or benevolence, even if behind the scenes they're making cold, calculated decisions to preserve power or navigate chaos. Consider history. Politicians with powerful rhetoric, clean appearances, and emotional appeal often defeat better qualified opponents who lack charisma or optics. Public figures, CEOs, even cult leaders, all have used this principle. They build loyalty not by being the most honest, but by appearing to be the most decisive, moral, or strong. It's the appearance of integrity that wins loyalty, not necessarily integrity itself. And Machiavelli didn't see this as immoral. He saw it as necessary. In a world where most people judge by first impression, leaders have to manage appearances deliberately. Otherwise, they become victims of misinterpretation and manipulation by others who are better at the game. So, what does this mean for you? It means being self-aware enough to understand how others perceive you and taking control of that perception. Whether you're running a business, managing a team, or navigating social dynamics, your image is your first defense and your most persuasive weapon. This isn't about being fake. It's about strategic presentation, knowing what people want to see and being able to deliver that without compromising your goals. This is why great leaders often perform a version of themselves. They dress for impact, speak with clarity, and display confidence, even when uncertain. They cultivate mystique or openness or toughness, depending on what their audience responds to. The loyalty they earn is rarely to their true selves, but to the version of themselves they've chosen to show the world. In modern times, this idea is more relevant than ever. Social media, public relations, and personal branding have turned every one of us into curators of our own image. But Machiavelli warned us long ago, people are loyal to the mask, not the man. If you ignore this truth, you're surrendering your power to someone who won't. Appearances are not just surface, they are strategy. It's safer to be feared than loved when both aren't possible. One of Machiavelli's most controversial and most quoted ideas is this: it is much safer to be feared than loved if one must choose. This statement has been debated for centuries, misunderstood by many, and used by rulers, CEOs, and commanders alike. It doesn't advocate cruelty for its own sake. It's a recognition of a hard fact. Love is fragile, but fear is reliable. Let's unpack this with depth. Machiavelli lived in a violent, unstable Italy, where power shifted constantly and betrayal was commonplace. Alliances collapsed. Trust meant little. In such a world, he observed that those who ruled through affection or moral purity often found themselves betrayed. Love, he argued, is a bond that people feel as long as it benefits them. It's emotional and thus conditional. When your leadership stops being convenient or comfortable, the love people had for you vanishes. Fear, however, works differently. It creates a boundary. A fearsome leader commands respect and restraint. People are less likely to cross someone they fear because they anticipate consequences. And it's that anticipation, not violence itself, that preserves control. Here's where Machiavelli adds a nuance. He didn't suggest being hated. He warned against cruelty that incites hatred because hatred leads to rebellion. Instead, he emphasized calculated fear, not brutality, but reputation. You don't have to punish everyone, but people should believe that crossing you has a cost. Modern leadership often runs into this same tension. Managers who want to be everyone's friend often end up with weak authority, inconsistent teams, and poor performance. On the other hand, those who are respected, maybe even a little feared, tend to get results. Their presence demands attention. Their standards are clear. People may not always like them, but they follow them. Why? Because fear breeds structure, and structure breeds stability. And again, Machiavelli didn't mean fear in the Hollywood villain sense. It can be as subtle as setting strong boundaries, holding people accountable, and not tolerating disloyalty or manipulation. Fear comes from consistency, not chaos. When people know that you won't hesitate to take action, they behave differently around you, and often more effectively. The beauty of this principle is that it can be used ethically. It doesn't mean being tyrannical. It means being strong. When people know you won't be taken advantage of, they think twice before undermining you. And while they might not love you in the emotional sense, they'll respect you. And that respect holds even when emotions change. In today's world, where so many leaders are concerned about image, popularity, and being liked, Machiavelli's principle offers clarity. Popularity fades, but the ability to command attention, make hard decisions, and maintain discipline, those are traits that last. Fear, properly understood, is not about cruelty. It's about certainty. A leader who is feared, without being hated, is often one who survives. And survival, to Machiavelli, is the first rule of power. Crush your enemies entirely. Half measures breed revenge. Machiavelli's philosophy here is as clear as it is chilling. Men should either be treated generously or destroyed, because they take revenge for slight injuries. For heavy ones they cannot. In other words, if you choose to confront a threat, don't go halfway. Don't reprimand them. Don't weaken them. Eliminate them politically, professionally, or otherwise, so completely that they cannot come back to haunt you. Because the human psyche, especially among ambitious adults in positions of power, does not easily forgive a near-death experience. In the real world, we often pull punches. Whether in business, family feuds, or social circles, there's a temptation to avoid going too far. You fire the problematic executive, but keep them close as a consultant. You expose a rival's lie, but spare them full public embarrassment. You win the deal, but let your opponent save face. These half measures may feel moral, even noble, but they leave the door open for retaliation. And make no mistake, people remember, a wounded opponent is a dangerous one. Machiavelli understood this not just as theory, but as survival strategy. In The Prince, he recounts the rise and fall of Cesare Borgia, a ruthless leader who initially followed this philosophy with brutal efficiency. When Borgia needed to pacify a rebellious province, he sent a merciless lieutenant to restore order, and then publicly executed that same lieutenant to win the people's favor and eliminate any threat to his own authority. Cold? Absolutely. But it worked, until Borgia himself fell victim to the same game when he hesitated, miscalculated, and let his enemies regroup. This lesson applies even today. In corporate takeovers, if you remove the CEO but keep their loyalists, you risk internal sabotage. In politics, if you expose a corrupt figure but leave them enough influence to sway public opinion, you may soon find them turning the narrative back on you. Crushing your enemy entirely doesn't always mean destruction. It can mean severing all ties, removing their influence, exposing them beyond recovery, or neutralizing their support base so completely that a comeback is impossible. It's not a moral judgment. It's a survival tactic. And for those navigating competitive landscapes in their 40s, 50s, and beyond, when the stakes are often higher and the losses more personal, this is less about cruelty and more about clarity. You either finish the threat, or the threat finishes you. Make bold moves, then control the narrative. One of Machiavelli's most dangerous insights is the importance of perception over reality. It's not enough to act, you must frame your action. He recognized that boldness alone doesn't create power. It's the story people tell about that boldness that defines how long your power lasts. Think about how often in life the person who takes the leap doesn't necessarily win, unless they take control of the narrative that follows. A CEO who cuts a division looks ruthless, unless they frame it as strategic refocusing. A politician who changes course looks inconsistent, unless they rebrand it as responsive leadership. The key isn't just what you do, it's how you shape the meaning of what you've done. Machiavelli understood that audiences, whether citizens, colleagues, or followers, need stories. They crave logic, morality, and justification. So, if you take bold action without giving people a narrative to believe in, they will invent one. And it will rarely serve you. This is why he insisted rulers not only act decisively, but immediately shape public perception of that action. In The Prince, he explains how new rulers must consolidate power quickly, even cruelly, but then distract the people with gestures of goodwill or reforms. Make the hard decisions early, control how they're talked about, and over time, people will forget the means and focus on the outcome. In modern life, this could be anything from launching a disruptive product to cutting ties with a toxic partner or realigning an entire company. The move itself might be necessary, but without narrative control, others will fill the void: gossip, press, rival accounts. Boldness without a story is simply chaos. And Machiavelli goes further. Timing matters. Control the narrative immediately. Letting silence linger gives others time to define the situation for you. This is especially relevant in an age of social media, where perception spreads faster than facts. If you're silent, you're guilty. If you're reactive, you're weak. If you're proactive, you're in control. For anyone 40 and up who's spent decades building their reputation, this lesson hits hard. You can do everything right, but if the story told about you doesn't match your intention, it can all unravel. Conversely, if you've stumbled in the past, reshaping the narrative can be the key to a comeback. Make bold moves, but shape them into myths that others carry for you. That's how power becomes legacy. Always appear just, but never let justice limit your strategy. Machiavelli didn't believe in fairness. He believed in effectiveness. To him, justice was not a fixed moral compass, but a tool. He advised leaders to appear just, honest, and principled, but only insofar as it served their strategy. If doing the right thing weakened your position or endangered your power, he saw no reason to pursue it. This strikes a nerve for many, especially those raised on ideals of fairness, meritocracy, and integrity. But the hard truth Machiavelli saw is that the world does not consistently reward the just. It rewards the perceived just. Those who seem ethical but act strategically often rise higher than those who follow the rules to the letter. That's not to say you should become a liar or a cheat. Machiavelli would argue that's bad strategy. Being caught destroys your image. What he advised was far more nuanced. Appear morally upright. Keep your principles public, but never let them handcuff your private decisions. If you need to betray an ally to protect your vision, do it, but make it look like a noble sacrifice. If you must bend the rules to achieve long-term good, bend them, but frame it as painful necessity. He admired leaders like Ferdinand of Aragon, who, while professing Christian values, expanded his empire through constant manipulation and betrayal. Ferdinand succeeded because he understood that appearing just gave him public trust, but being just in every decision would have made him weak. This lesson applies far beyond politics. In business, sticking strictly to idealism may make you well-liked, but rarely feared or respected. Sometimes, refusing to lay off staff may seem just, but could sink the company and harm many more in the long run. In negotiation, giving every side a fair deal may dilute your power and leave you with less than what's needed to survive. For the mature adult navigating power dynamics in their career or community, this is about playing two games: the game of ethics as image and the game of strategy as survival. Learn to tell people what they want to hear while doing what must be done. Appear just, not to fool others, but to maintain influence and preserve control. Justice, then, is a costume, a powerful one. Wear it convincingly, wear it always, but don't let it dictate the script. Power isn't earned through pure virtue, it's kept through calculated virtue. Machiavelli didn't teach cruelty, he taught control. And he believed the most dangerous leader is the one who knows when to be just and when to leave justice behind. Distract the masses with symbols while you reshape the system. One of the most cunning power strategies in Machiavellian thinking is the use of symbols to distract the masses while quietly reshaping the system to your advantage. This principle is not just relevant in historical politics. It plays out in corporations, media, even family dynamics. The idea is simple: control attention, and you control power. Machiavelli understood that most people don't want complexity. They want clarity, meaning, and reassurance. They crave the feeling that everything is under control, even when it's not. That's where symbols come in. Whether it's a flag, a slogan, a leader's image, or a national anthem, symbols create the illusion of stability, while major shifts happen out of sight. The masses are often more influenced by what things represent than by what they actually are. For instance, a politician may overhaul the entire economic structure behind closed doors, but as long as they show up at military parades, kiss babies, and quote founding fathers, they're seen as loyal patriots. The emotional resonance of the symbol blinds people to the mechanics of what's really happening. Think of the phrase, "Make America Great Again." Regardless of political alignment, that slogan worked because it symbolized a feeling, a return to strength, pride, simplicity. Meanwhile, behind that curtain, entirely new dynamics of power, policy, and control were being enacted. That's Machiavellian strategy at its finest. In business, this looks like corporate leaders preaching values like innovation or people-first culture while offshoring labor, automating roles, or restructuring to favor shareholders. As long as the mission statement remains intact and the marketing team floods social media with feel-good messaging, employees and customers often buy into the illusion. The brilliance of this tactic lies in its psychological grip. People are more emotionally connected to what things mean than to what things do. That means while you're consolidating power, cutting deals, or restructuring systems, all you need to do is feed the public something emotionally satisfying. It's distraction by design. You must remember the reshaping of systems is often dry, complex, and politically sensitive. But symbols? They're loud, clean, and inspiring. That's why revolutions, reformations, and takeovers almost always involve flags, slogans, or iconic images. So how do you use this tactic? Identify the emotional currency of your audience. What do they fear losing? What do they idealize? Package those into symbols, something they can latch onto. While they rally behind it, quietly build the real power underneath. Be cautious, though. This requires discipline. If you get caught reshaping the system without symbolic cover, you'll be accused of tyranny or manipulation. But if you keep the emotional illusion alive, the crowd will not only forgive your changes, they'll embrace them as progress. In short, if you want to change the structure, don't announce it. Wrap it in something they already trust. While they salute the banner, you redraw the blueprint. Gain power by aligning with the strong, but never outshine them. This lesson is pure Machiavelli. Proximity to power gives you strength, but standing in its spotlight makes you a threat. The trick is to attach yourself to powerful individuals or institutions, benefit from their strength, but never display so much potential that you become their rival. People in power, whether they admit it or not, are deeply aware of threats. They didn't get where they are by ignoring competition. If you align yourself too closely with a strong figure and start shining too brightly, their instinct will be to neutralize you before you become a challenger. That's human nature, especially among those who fought to the top. So Machiavelli's advice is surgical. Get close, benefit, but blend in. Play the role of the loyal advisor, the silent operator, the indispensable yet non-threatening ally. Let them feel secure. Let them believe they control the room, even if your influence is growing. Why does this work so well? Because power is rarely solitary. Even kings need ministers, CEOs need strategists, generals need lieutenants. If you can become useful to the strong, while never competing with them for recognition, you carve out a zone of safety and influence. Let's look at historical examples. Think of Cardinal Richelieu in France, not the king, but often more powerful in practice. He didn't claim the crown. He supported it, protected it, and subtly ran the machine beneath it. Or consider modern political advisors, figures like Karl Rove, Valerie Jarrett, or Steve Bannon. Not elected, but extremely influential. That's the sweet spot. Powerful, but not exposed. In corporate life, this applies too. The top executive doesn't always need a challenger. They need a trusted deputy. Be that person. Let them bask in recognition. You focus on access, influence, and strategy. Let them shine publicly while you quietly expand your reach behind the curtain. But remember, never confuse proximity with protection. If you begin to draw too much praise, if others start comparing your abilities to the leaders, you're in danger. You must regulate your visibility like a thermostat. Turn it down when needed. When compliments come, redirect them. When you succeed, attribute it to the leader's guidance. Appear loyal to the point of naivety, even if you're playing 3 steps ahead. The ultimate goal here is to inherit power when the strong falter, not to seize it while they're still alert. Most powerful figures fall eventually, through scandal, health, age, or irrelevance. And when they do, the trusted figure at their side is perfectly positioned to take over. So align yourself with the strong. Use their reach, protection, and networks. But never outshine them, because the moment they feel your light getting too bright, they'll snuff you out. Learn to act like a fox. Cunning gets you through traps. In The Prince, Machiavelli writes, "A ruler must learn how to act like both the lion and the fox." Why the fox? Because it's cunning. It can recognize traps, avoid snares, and outwit those stronger than itself. It's not the biggest or the strongest, but it survives. Being cunning, in Machiavellian terms, isn't about being deceitful just for fun. It's about recognizing danger before others do, understanding hidden motives, and outsmarting rather than overpowering your rivals. The fox is the strategist in a world of fighters. In today's world, brute strength, whether physical or hierarchical, doesn't guarantee safety. A fox sees the politics behind the promotion, the insecurity behind the compliment, the trap behind the offer. They understand that people often disguise their ambitions, and the cunning individual must read between the lines. So what does it mean to be fox-like in practice? It means asking questions when others accept answers. It means pausing before reacting, analyzing before responding. It means you don't just take people at their word. You watch what they do, not what they say. Cunning people don't trust easily. They verify. A fox uses misdirection to avoid conflict. When someone expects confrontation, the fox gives flattery. When people look left, the fox moves right. This isn't cowardice, it's strategy. The fox doesn't waste energy fighting battles it can win with cleverness. In negotiations, a fox never reveals their bottom line. In alliances, a fox keeps their options open. In leadership, a fox rewards loyalty but tests it privately. They gather information constantly because information is the currency of strategy. Machiavelli would argue that those who rely only on brute force, like the lion, eventually walk into traps set by foxes. The fox survives by thinking ahead, by being 2 moves ahead of both friends and enemies. It learns people's patterns and uses that understanding to avoid confrontation unless absolutely necessary. But being a fox also requires restraint. If you become too sly, if people sense you're always manipulating, you'll become mistrusted. The fox must wear a sheep's clothing now and then, blending in, letting others feel smarter, letting rivals believe they're in control. This balance, being cunning without appearing sneaky, is an art. It's the art of influence, survival, and subtle domination. Ultimately, being a fox is about longevity. Lions rule briefly and fall hard. Foxes? They survive regime changes, adapt to new rulers, and thrive in shifting conditions. So don't just roar. Outthink, outsmart, outlast. Learn to fight like a lion. Strength deters challengers. Machiavelli famously argued that a ruler must learn to fight with the strength of a lion and the cunning of a fox. The lion represents raw power, strength, dominance, and the ability to crush resistance. It's the visible force that warns enemies. Cross this line and you will pay dearly. In a world driven by competition, whether it's politics, business, or personal influence, projecting strength is not optional. It's survival. Why does strength matter so much? Because power attracts challengers. People are always watching, waiting for weakness. If they sense vulnerability, they'll strike, whether it's to take your position, undermine your influence, or exploit your resources. But if you establish early on that you are not to be trifled with, that there are clear consequences to aggression, many potential threats will reconsider. Strength in this context isn't just physical, it's mental, a duo or emotional and strategic. It's the ability to say no when pressured, to enforce boundaries when they're tested, and to respond decisively when provoked. In a corporate setting, this might mean defending your team from a hostile takeover, or refusing to compromise on core values even when profits are at stake. In politics, it's projecting authority during crises so that dissent doesn't spiral into chaos. But Machiavelli also warned against being only a lion. A ruler who is just strong but not clever is easily trapped. The lion is vulnerable to cunning. Think snares, ambushes, traps. So while strength deters direct confrontation, it must be paired with intelligence. Still, the lion's value lies in deterrence. It's what makes enemies think twice. It's what keeps the walls standing before the negotiation even begins. Take the example of strong historical leaders. Winston Churchill, during Wappitotuwatu, projected unwavering defiance against the Axis powers, even when Britain stood virtually alone. His lion-like spirit emboldened his people and deterred further German expansion into Britain. It was psychological warfare, built on the optics of strength. Strength also communicates competence. People follow leaders who exude certainty. A lion doesn't beg for loyalty, it commands it. And in doing so, it frees itself from the exhausting task of constantly reaffirming its authority. Once the message is out, I don't flinch and I don't lose, others fall in line or stay out of the way. This applies even in personal spheres. The parent who lays down firm but fair rules creates stability. The individual who confidently handles confrontation at work earns respect. The person who refuses to be emotionally manipulated sets a tone of unshakable presence. All these are lion-like qualities. They broadcast strength, and strength keeps the jackals away. To live like a lion doesn't mean roaring at every opportunity. It means knowing when to stand firm, when to draw a line, and when to show that behind your calm exterior lies unshakable power. When people know you can't be pushed, they stop trying. Keep your friends close and your potential threats even closer. This lesson is often attributed to Machiavelli, even though it's popularized by the Godfather, and it aligns perfectly with his strategic worldview. Machiavelli believed that proximity equals control. The people who have the most power to harm you are the ones you must understand, watch, and if possible, guide. Keeping your enemies close doesn't mean pretending to be their best friend. It means placing yourself in a position where their actions can be anticipated, influenced, and, if necessary, neutralized. The closer a potential threat is, the less surprise they can deliver. Distance allows enemies to plot in silence. Closeness exposes them to your scrutiny. Why is this effective? Because people reveal themselves through behavior. If you maintain regular contact with those who might challenge you, competitors, critics, dissenters, you gain insight into their motives and methods. You learn their patterns, their weaknesses, their triggers. This makes them easier to manage. Machiavelli saw this play out in the courts of Italy, where alliances shifted rapidly and trust was scarce. The ruler who kept rivals in his court by offering them titles, honors, or roles could monitor them. This served two purposes. It made rivals feel important, and more importantly, it put them under watch. It's much harder for someone to plot your downfall when they're seated across from you every day. This applies in modern life just as powerfully. In the workplace, this could mean inviting a known critic to be part of a strategic committee. It might seem counterintuitive, but it gives you visibility into their thinking and also involves them in your success. If they fail to support you, they expose themselves. If they help you, you gain an unlikely ally. This principle is not about paranoia, it's about strategic positioning. It's tempting to shut out or avoid difficult people. But Machiavelli would argue that only gives them more room to act freely. Bringing them into your space creates tension you can control. There's another benefit. Managing threats this way often disarms them. When people are included or feel heard, they have fewer reasons to act against you. This doesn't mean you trust them. It means you're reducing the threat level by making them feel visible. Invisibility breeds rebellion. Visibility invites accountability. Even in personal relationships, this strategy works. The family member or acquaintance who stirs conflict can often be managed through regular, calm engagement. Not to change them, but to ensure you're never caught off guard. Keeping your threats close also allows you to influence their decisions before they become dangerous. Influence flows more easily through proximity than distance. The closer you are, the more you can shape perception, narrative, and outcomes. Machiavelli understood that enemies are facts of life. Eliminating every threat is impossible, but weakening them through closeness, that's a game you can win again and again. Goodwill is useful until fear becomes more profitable. In The Prince, Machiavelli lays out a harsh but enduring truth. Goodwill is a useful tool, but fear is more reliable when control is the goal. That doesn't mean goodwill has no place in leadership or influence. It means it has limits. And when those limits are reached, power is better preserved through fear. Goodwill, whether it's earned through generosity, kindness, or diplomacy, is a valuable asset. It buys cooperation, it makes people more likely to follow, and it creates a reputation that can open doors. For a time, being liked is advantageous. It creates soft influence. People do what you ask because they admire you or feel a sense of loyalty. But goodwill is fragile. It depends on constant maintenance. One misstep, one unpopular decision, and it can evaporate. People are fickle. They forget past kindness when their current needs aren't met. That's why Machiavelli saw fear as the more durable currency. Fear demands less upkeep. It's remembered longer. And crucially, it doesn't require affection to function. Let's break this down. When people act out of goodwill, they do so because they want to. When they act out of fear, they do so because they have to. If your power depends only on people's desire to support you, you are vulnerable to shifts in mood, rumor, or public opinion. But if it's based on consequences, if they know there's a cost to disobedience, they will comply even when they dislike you. In business, this is why some leaders pivot from charm to authority during a crisis. When everything is on the line, being liked becomes a secondary concern. Decisions have to be made. Control must be asserted. If fear of poor performance reviews, job loss, or public accountability ensures that the team functions, then that fear becomes the more profitable tool. Machiavelli didn't suggest that leaders abandon goodwill. In fact, he valued it when establishing power. But once power is built, maintaining it requires a different engine. This is the pivot point. Leaders must know when to stop courting affection and start demanding results. In a modern context, this shows up in difficult conversations, firings, policy changes, and holding firm in the face of dissent. Goodwill might be lost in those moments, but fear steps in to keep the machine running. The key is balance. If fear becomes cruelty, it backfires. But if it's enforced through consistency and fairness, it becomes the backbone of a respected structure. This applies personally, too. When someone tests your boundaries, your reaction tells them everything about what they can get away with. If your goodwill is endless, they'll keep pushing. But the moment you assert that crossing the line has consequences, they pause. That pause? That's the profitability of fear. Machiavelli's brilliance lay in understanding human psychology. People will love you until they don't, but they will fear you until they're sure you're no longer a threat. That's why fear, when managed with precision, is often the safer investment. Build your reputation on results, not promises. In The Prince, Machiavelli warns that reputation is a tool, but only when it's forged by results, not empty words. This idea strikes directly at the heart of how power is earned and sustained. Promises may stir hope, but results build legacy. And in Machiavelli's ruthless political landscape, and today's as well, those who deliver are feared and respected. Those who merely speak are forgotten. Promises are easy. Anyone can talk about what they'll do, what they plan to build, or what they stand for. But Machiavelli knew that in unstable times, people don't crave speeches. They crave security and decisive leadership. A prince, or any leader, gains power by showing what they've done, not what they intend. This resonates today across every sphere. In business, leaders who overpromise and underdeliver lose credibility fast. Politicians who campaign with bold visions but leave a trail of broken promises become symbols of disillusionment. Even in families and friendships, trust is not built on intentions, but on what someone actually follows through on. Machiavelli goes further. He suggests that promises themselves can be dangerous. They raise expectations. They give your enemies ammunition. And when you fail to meet them, even if you were 90% successful, people focus on the shortfall. In contrast, when you stay silent and deliver, the impact is undeniable. You control the story. You set the terms. Take, for example, the famous Roman general Scipio Africanus. He didn't spend time making grand speeches about how he'd defeat Hannibal. He simply did it. Or consider historical figures like Margaret Thatcher or Lee Kuan Yew. They were controversial, yes, but their reputations were built on cold, hard outcomes, not campaign slogans. This also means understanding that image must follow proof, not precede it. Reputation is like armor. If it's built on words, it shatters easily. But when it's forged from action, it becomes a shield you can carry for life. And for those who've spent decades in the workforce, especially those between 40 and 60, you've likely experienced both sides. You've seen coworkers who talked their way into promotions but failed to deliver. And you've seen the quiet achievers, the ones who kept their heads down, got things done, and earned influence the right way. Machiavelli's lesson is clear. Be the second kind. So while others spend time promising what they'll achieve, the Machiavellian leader stays quiet, makes moves, and lets the results speak. That's how real power is built, not by talking, but by doing. Appear consistent while acting opportunistically. One of Machiavelli's more cunning strategies is the ability to appear consistent while acting opportunistically. This isn't hypocrisy, it's survival. The world rewards those who adapt, but people trust those who appear stable. The genius lies in doing both at once. Consistency is one of the most admired traits in leadership. People want to believe in a stable hand, a predictable mind, a moral compass that doesn't swing. But here's the twist. The world itself isn't stable. Markets shift, alliances break, enemies become allies, conditions evolve, and the leader who clings rigidly to old methods under new circumstances will fail. Machiavelli understood this perfectly. He wrote that a prince must be like a fox and a lion, strong, yes, but cunning enough to adapt. The key is in perception. To the public, the prince must appear unwavering in principles, loyal to his word, faithful to his values. But behind the scenes, he must be watching, analyzing, and striking when the moment is right, even if that means doing things that contradict past behavior. This philosophy aligns with what we now call strategic flexibility. In modern leadership, those who succeed long-term aren't the ones who follow a strict ideological path. They're the ones who shift gears smoothly, quietly letting go of failing strategies while maintaining the illusion of steadiness. Think of Winston Churchill. He changed political parties twice. Yet to the public, he was always seen as a bulldog of British strength. Or look at Steve Jobs, who returned to Apple and reshaped the company in ways that completely diverged from its original direction. Yet people saw him as a visionary, not a flip-flopper. For those in the 40 to 60 age group, this advice speaks to the complexity of real-world leadership. Many of you have learned, sometimes the hard way, that sticking to the same approach doesn't always earn respect. The world favors those who learn, pivot, and outmaneuver, even if it means changing the rules mid-game. The trick is doing it without appearing untrustworthy. This is where Machiavelli's brilliance lies. He doesn't advocate chaos or manipulation for its own sake. He advocates it for survival. He knew that if people see you change too often, they lose confidence. But if you present your decisions as aligned with core values, even when they're tactical shifts, you keep control of the narrative. In essence, act like a reed in the wind, flexible yet rooted. Let others believe you're the oak tree, unyielding and noble. But behind the scenes, bend with the storm, change with the seasons, and take advantage of every shift. That's not deceit, that's power in motion. Don't correct every lie. Let rumors work in your favor. Perhaps one of Machiavelli's most unsettling lessons is this: not every lie must be corrected. In fact, sometimes a well-placed rumor can work better than the truth. For a society raised on the virtue of honesty, this sounds alarming. But for those who've spent decades navigating real-world politics, at work, in business, or in life, this advice can feel eerily accurate. Machiavelli understood the power of perception. He knew that in the game of influence, what people believe is often more important than what's true. And trying to squash every rumor can not only exhaust your energy, but also draw more attention to it than it deserves. In The Prince, he argues that rulers must master the art of silence, of letting certain accusations, whispers, and lies float if they serve a purpose, or if correcting them would do more harm. This is not about endorsing falsehoods. It's about understanding the battlefield. Sometimes silence is smarter than defense. Consider the Streisand effect in modern terms, when trying to shut down a false claim actually amplifies it. In this light, Machiavelli's advice is strategic. Control the narrative by choosing what to fight and what to ignore. Even more strategically, sometimes a rumor can be useful. If people believe you are more powerful, more ruthless, more connected than you truly are, why correct them? Machiavelli would argue you shouldn't. The fear it creates can be a stronger weapon than any truth you could offer. Take historical leaders like Catherine the Great. She allowed rumors to circulate about her intelligence network being vast and omnipotent. That perception deterred conspiracies. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. The rumor became armor. In the business world, leaders often face gossip and political games. Trying to correct every misstatement is a full-time job and usually a waste of one's capital. It's better to assess, does this rumor weaken me, or does it make others nervous in a way that benefits my position? To those 40 and older, you've likely experienced this firsthand. You've learned that not every battle is worth fighting, and sometimes letting people believe a half-truth gives you the upper hand. Machiavelli knew that reputation is fluid and that a clever leader shapes it, not always with facts, but with timing, silence, and suggestion. So let others shout, let the whispers float, and when it benefits you, lean into the myth. A Machiavellian leader knows truth is powerful, but belief is what controls the room. You don't need to be moral, just seem moral. Machiavelli's genius lay in his ability to separate perception from reality. One of his coldest yet most practical insights is this: you don't actually need to be good, you just need to look good. In the realm of politics, leadership, and power, image carries far more weight than virtue. People are far more likely to judge your character by your appearance than by your private behavior. And most won't look beyond the surface if you give them a convincing enough mask. In The Prince, Machiavelli famously states that it is necessary to appear merciful, faithful, humane, religious, upright, but to be ready to act otherwise if necessity requires it. That's the essence of this philosophy. He wasn't calling for hypocrisy. He was pointing out the brutal truth. People want leaders who reflect their values, at least on the surface. But what those same people reward is effectiveness. We can see this in virtually every domain of leadership. Politicians campaign on values: honesty, faith, family, justice. But once in office, many face the compromises and trade-offs of real-world governance. Deals must be made. Enemies must be managed. Sometimes, hard choices mean doing things that don't fit the moral narrative, but as long as the public image is maintained and the results are acceptable, most people look the other way. Corporate leadership tells a similar story. CEOs speak in terms of corporate responsibility, ethical labor, sustainability. But behind closed doors, the decisions made are driven by shareholder value, competition, and survival. A company might run harsh cost-cutting measures while releasing a marketing campaign about community values and inclusion. What matters most is whether the brand appears to align with public ideals, not whether it always does behind the scenes. Machiavelli's insight is sharp and unnerving. Appearances are enough. People don't follow saints, they follow symbols. If you can embody what they respect or admire, even if it's just an illusion, they'll give you their trust, their votes, their money. And if you can do this while keeping your actual motives hidden, you gain control without suspicion. But here's where the philosophy deepens. The appearance of morality isn't just camouflage. It's a tool. It builds alliances. It invites loyalty. It disarms enemies. If people believe you're virtuous, they'll hesitate to question your actions. They'll defend you against critics, and that buys you the freedom to act decisively, even ruthlessly, behind the curtain. For those in their 40s to 60s, this hits close to home. You've likely seen this play out across your life, perhaps in managers who preached transparency but operated in secrecy, or in public figures who projected kindness but ruled with steel behind the scenes. Maybe you've even had to play this game yourself. To survive a toxic workplace, navigate office politics, or protect your family from unnecessary conflict. Machiavelli isn't telling you to be evil. He's telling you to manage perception. If being truly moral leads to your downfall, what purpose does that serve? But if appearing moral gives you the power to do what must be done, then the mask becomes not just a disguise, but a weapon. Timing is everything. Strike when your opponent is unbalanced. In the pursuit of power, skill alone is never enough. What often separates the conqueror from the defeated isn't strength, intelligence, or even ambition. It's timing. Machiavelli believed that fortune favors not just the bold, but the strategically patient. Knowing when to act is more important than simply having the ability to act. This philosophy centers around the idea that all forces, people, institutions, enemies, go through cycles of strength and vulnerability. The key to victory isn't charging forward at the first opportunity. It's waiting, watching for the exact moment when your opponent stumbles, when the environment shifts, when the gate is unguarded. Then and only then do you strike. Machiavelli compared timing to a river. You can't control when it floods, but you can prepare to exploit the flood. A wise leader, he argued, studies the tides of fortune and chaos. When the wave comes, they ride it. When the waters recede, they dig trenches, reinforce walls, and get ready for the next shift. Consider military history. Napoleon was a master tactician, but his most famous victories came when he exploited the disarray of his enemies, splitting coalitions, striking supply lines, moving faster than expected. When his enemies were prepared and balanced, he often faltered. But when he found a weakness, even a momentary one, he attacked with precision. Or think of the business world. Companies don't just launch products whenever they feel like it. They wait for the market to show a weakness. Apple didn't invent the smartphone, but it waited until consumers were frustrated with complex interfaces and clunky designs. Then it struck with a sleek, simple product and perfect marketing timing. The result? Market dominance. In personal life, timing is just as critical. You may know exactly how to confront someone or renegotiate a deal, but doing it when they're defensive or powerful will only backfire. Wait until they're off balance, emotionally, politically, financially, and your words land with 10 times the impact. But here's the challenge Machiavelli understood. Waiting is hard. It requires discipline, foresight, and often the restraint to do nothing while others rush ahead. Most people mistake movement for progress. They want to act, to fight, to win now. But the wise know that inaction, when purposeful, is a move in itself. For the 40 to 60-year-old audience, this lesson is especially poignant. With age comes the understanding that not every battle must be fought immediately. You've seen people burn bridges out of impatience. You've seen how careers, relationships, and power structures shift over time. Sometimes the person who wronged you today becomes vulnerable tomorrow. And if you've waited, planned, and stayed patient, you'll be ready to strike, not out of revenge, but out of calculated opportunity. Machiavelli wasn't preaching cowardice. He was teaching tactical timing. Because when your opponent is unbalanced, distracted, or divided, even a small push can topple them. But if you strike too early, when they are prepared, your strength will be wasted and your move exposed. So observe, wait, prepare, and when the moment comes, move without hesitation. That, in Machiavelli's world, is the essence of power. Fear is maintained by punishment, not kindness. Machiavelli made it clear, fear, once earned, must be maintained. And it isn't maintained through kindness, apology, or passivity. It's maintained through punishment. Not cruelty for its own sake, but precise, deliberate action that reinforces authority. Why? Because fear is not just a feeling. It's a mechanism of control. People act differently when they believe there are consequences. When those consequences are consistent, swift, and unmistakable, fear remains alive. The moment you let fear fade, when you let offenses slide or try to win hearts with forgiveness, you weaken the power structure you've built. Fear is powerful because it produces predictability. When someone knows stepping out of line results in punishment, they're more likely to obey. Kindness, on the other hand, invites negotiation. That doesn't mean kindness has no place, but Machiavelli would say it belongs after order is established, not before. Think of it like this. A parent who never enforces rules creates chaos. A manager who never holds people accountable ends up being ignored. A leader who tries to be liked at all costs eventually loses respect. And once respect is gone, power quickly follows. People may enjoy kindness, but they respond to discipline. Machiavelli warned against leaders becoming hated, but he made a clear distinction between hate and fear. You can be feared without being loathed. It's about enforcing limits and making it known that certain actions have a price. This doesn't mean violence or tyranny. It can be as simple as firing someone who breaks trust, confronting dishonesty directly, or cutting ties with unreliable partners. In a corporate setting, imagine a leader who consistently enforces deadlines, delivers sharp feedback, and has no problem making unpopular decisions. At first, that person may be seen as tough, even cold, but over time, their reputation for decisiveness becomes their power. People know not to test their patience, not because they yell or posture, but because they follow through. Contrast that with the leader who avoids conflict, who lets mistakes slide, who shows kindness even when boundaries are crossed. Eventually, that leader is not seen as generous, they're seen as weak. And when people start to feel they can get away with things, fear vanishes, and so does authority. Machiavelli would argue that a leader's mercy should be rare, intentional, and strategic. If you forgive too often, mercy becomes expected. But if punishment follows every betrayal or failure, then even a single act of kindness later can have more impact because it's seen as a favor, not a right. Those in their 40s to 60s have often lived through this reality. You've seen bosses who were too nice lose their grip. You've seen relationships collapse because boundaries weren't enforced. You've learned that in life, strength isn't about aggression. It's about consequence. Punishment doesn't have to be cruel. It just has to be clear. That's how you keep fear alive, and that's how fear becomes a tool, not a flaw, in lasting leadership. Be slow to trust, but quick to assess. Machiavelli's world was full of betrayal, shifting alliances, and deceptive allies. He learned that trust is a luxury, one that should be granted only after careful observation. His advice? Be slow to trust, but quick to assess. The danger lies not in being cautious, it lies in being blind. To Machiavelli, extending immediate trust is like handing someone a sword and turning your back. It's not noble, it's naive. He saw trust not as a virtue, but as a calculated risk, something that must be earned, tested, and continuously re-evaluated. This philosophy doesn't promote paranoia, it promotes alertness. The key is to constantly read behavior, listen closely, observe loyalties, and weigh motives. You don't have to assume the worst about people, but you must remain aware of what they stand to gain or lose by staying loyal to you. People act in their own interest. That's not cynicism, it's human nature. And trust, to Machiavelli, is only justified when someone's self-interest aligns with yours. Once that alignment breaks, so might their loyalty. So how do you apply this practically? In your personal life, don't rush emotional investments. Observe how people act under pressure, how they treat others, how they handle conflict. Words are easy, patterns are proof. If someone shows inconsistency, excessive flattery, or changes their story often, that's a red flag. Act accordingly. In business or leadership, assess what motivates people. Are they loyal because of values or because of fear? Are they driven by a shared mission or by opportunity? Are they saying what you want to hear or what's actually true? And here's the second half of the principle. Be quick to assess. The longer you wait to evaluate someone's true nature, the deeper their potential damage. This doesn't mean jumping to conclusions. It means forming judgments as soon as there's evidence, not after things fall apart. Machiavelli understood that most disasters begin with misplaced trust. A ruler who trusts a general too quickly might lose a kingdom. A CEO who trusts an unvetted partner might lose the company. A spouse who trusts without question might lose years of their life to deception. But what's empowering about this idea is that it puts you in control. You don't have to be a victim of betrayal. You can learn to see it coming. And by being slow to trust but quick to assess, you give yourself time to read the room, watch the players, and respond strategically, not emotionally. For those in their 40s to 60s, this hits home. You've likely had your trust broken at least once, maybe by a colleague, a friend, or a partner. But you've also learned that those wounds were often preceded by signs you chose to ignore. Machiavelli's philosophy tells you, don't ignore them next time. In life, trust is a gift, and gifts should only go to those who've proven they know what to do with them. Control perception, and you control power. Machiavelli was perhaps one of the earliest thinkers to understand the full force of optics. His insight was radical. You don't need to control everything, just how people think about everything. Control perception, and you don't just influence people, you lead them. Perception is more powerful than truth because it travels faster. In a world governed by appearances, what people believe matters more than what is. And if you shape those beliefs, you shape the playing field. Machiavelli saw this with rulers who appeared merciful even while orchestrating brutal campaigns. He saw it in religious figures who preached humility while amassing power. He saw it in princes who maintained the image of unity while suppressing opposition behind the scenes. In each case, the truth was hidden, but the perception was managed. Fast forward to today. Politics, business, media, it's all perception. A leader doesn't need to be good, they need to look competent. A company doesn't need to be ethical, it needs to seem responsible. Public relations isn't just a department, it's a weapon. The narrative matters more than the nuance, and this isn't always a bad thing. Perception is how we organize trust, attention, and influence. If you don't control how people see you, someone else will. And once someone owns the story about you, it's incredibly hard to take it back. Machiavelli's advice: be the author of your own legend. Choose what traits you want to be known for. Frame your actions within a narrative that supports those traits. If you must make a controversial decision, do it under the guise of duty or necessity. If you must remove someone, do it as if you're protecting the greater good. Manipulative? Maybe, but it's how power works. Consider how branding works in business. A luxury watch may cost $50 to make, but sells for $5,000 because of perception. A startup may be bleeding money but looks disruptive because of clever messaging and sleek design. Image is not decoration. It's leverage. And perception isn't just for external power. It affects internal strength too. When people believe in your confidence, they defer to your authority. When they perceive you as unshakable, they follow you in uncertainty. People look for signals, and if you can control the signals, you can guide the reaction. This lesson is invaluable to those with life experience. If you've lived long enough, you've seen how reality can be overridden by narrative. You've seen how a rumor, a reputation, or a misjudged moment can define someone. But you've also learned that with discipline and clarity, you can shape how you're seen, and in doing so, shape what others do. Perception is the battlefield, and the person who controls it doesn't need to control every piece of the game, just how others see the board. Always give others the illusion of choice. One of the most psychologically astute principles Machiavelli implies, though never says outright, is the power of controlling others by letting them think they're in control. In The Prince, he often emphasizes the importance of manipulating perception, managing appearances, and guiding outcomes without force. One way to do this is by offering people choices, just not real ones. This tactic is rooted in human psychology. People resist being controlled outright. Tell someone what to do and they'll instinctively push back, but present them with 2 or 3 options, all of which ultimately benefit you, and they'll not only choose one, they'll feel empowered doing so. It's leadership by illusion, not domination. Consider a political leader negotiating peace between 2 factions. Instead of issuing demands, he offers 2 settlement options. One seems lenient, the other severe. Both favor his long-term goals, but because the opposing party feels like they chose, they're more likely to commit. That's the genius: control through perceived autonomy. In business, this tactic is used all the time. Think of a company presenting a limited-time offer, a basic package, a premium package, and a best value option in between. The pricing, features, and presentation are carefully crafted to nudge customers toward the choice the company wants them to make, all while making them feel like they've made an independent decision. Now scale this up to leadership. A CEO might present their board with 3 strategies for the coming quarter. 2 are subtly risky or underdeveloped, while the third, the one they wanted all along, is positioned as a compromise. The board feels consulted, engaged, and involved, but the outcome was pre-designed. Machiavelli understood that freedom is one of the most intoxicating illusions you can give people, and once someone feels they've freely chosen a path, they're more loyal to it. They'll defend that decision, own it, and commit to it far more fiercely than if it was imposed. This strategy also reduces resistance. When people believe they're partners in the process, they don't rebel. They don't feel manipulated, even though they are. It's a smoother, quieter way to lead, one that leaves no fingerprints, no open conflict, and no obvious dominance. And let's be honest, this resonates deeply with people, 40 and over, who've seen how raw, head-on power moves can backfire. By midlife, you've likely learned that persuasion trumps pressure, that people follow those who guide rather than push. Machiavelli didn't believe in brute force unless absolutely necessary. He believed in the soft kill, guiding others to do what you want, thinking it was their idea. To master power, don't just make decisions. Design the choices. Let others pick from them. They'll walk right into your strategy, grateful to be included. Disarm others with charm, then outmaneuver them. This Machiavellian insight is about duality, how power is best achieved not through immediate aggression, but through the art of seduction followed by strategic execution. Charm is your weapon of entry. Outmaneuvering is your weapon of advancement. At its core, this principle relies on a key truth about human behavior. People lower their defenses around those they like. When you're charming, agreeable, or even deferential, people underestimate you. They see you as friendly, maybe naive, maybe non-threatening. That's the opening. Once their guard is down, you move, not recklessly, but precisely, quietly, in a way they never saw coming. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must learn to act as a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves. In modern terms, the fox is charm, subtlety, and psychological manipulation. The lion is execution, dominance, and decisive moves. The key is using the fox first. Let's say you're in a competitive professional environment. Everyone's fighting for promotions, power, or influence. If you come off as blunt, aggressive, or overly ambitious, people get wary. They mark you as a threat. They prepare countermeasures. But if you come off as supportive, helpful, and agreeable, they trust you. They let you in. They give you access, sometimes to information, sometimes to networks, and often to vulnerabilities. This is not manipulation for cruelty's sake. It's strategy. Charm builds the bridge. Once crossed, you can act. This principle is used everywhere, from corporate boardrooms to political campaigns to social movements. Take someone like Lyndon B. Johnson, who was known for overwhelming charm and backslapping friendliness. Behind that smile, though, was one of the most ruthlessly effective political tacticians in U.S. history. His ability to disarm senators with personal attention allowed him to pass legislation they didn't even want, because by the time they realized his angle, they were already trapped in it. Charm buys time. It creates the illusion of harmony, and that illusion is your cover. Once in position, you strike, not violently, but smartly. You realign the project. You win the contract. You pull the alliance apart just enough to get what you need. This philosophy works especially well for those in their 40s and beyond, because by this point in life, you've learned that not all battles are worth fighting face forward. Sometimes you win more by letting people underestimate you. Sometimes power is best wielded quietly, with a smile that conceals the sword. And here's the key. If you charm well enough, they'll never even realize they've been outmaneuvered. They'll think they lost to the system, or to fate, or to themselves. Meanwhile, you've advanced with no resistance. Charm is not weakness. It's camouflage. In the hands of the wise, it's the most dangerous weapon of all. Never be predictable. Routine invites rebellion. Predictability is the silent enemy of power. In Machiavellian strategy, predictability creates patterns, and patterns can be exploited. Once others know what you will do, how you'll react, or where your boundaries are, they begin to plot around you. That's the seed of rebellion, manipulation, and ultimately, your downfall. When leaders fall into routines, always responding the same way, always punishing the same way, always forgiving the same way, they become easy to anticipate. And in the world of power, being anticipated is being neutralized. Why does predictability lead to rebellion? Because it breeds comfort and calculation. If people know you always back down when pressed, they'll press harder. If they know you always reward loyalty on schedule, they'll fake loyalty just long enough to cash in. If they know your tolerance, your rules, your reactions, they can navigate around them. Worse, they may begin to see your leadership as mechanical or weak. Machiavelli would advise that unpredictability is a form of control. If others can't guess what you'll do, they're forced to remain cautious. They'll second-guess their actions. They'll walk more carefully. That confusion creates respect and even fear. It reminds people that they are not in control of your responses, and that makes you dangerous. Danger is a deterrent. This doesn't mean being random or chaotic. It means being strategically flexible. You must build enough mystery into your leadership that people can't confidently predict the consequences of crossing you. Maybe you forgive once, and the next time you punish harshly. Maybe you're generous one day and withdrawn the next. The message should be clear. Don't assume you know what I'll do. Even in relationships, personal, professional, political, predictable behavior invites complacency. The people around you stop treating you with the alertness and attentiveness they once had. They get lazy. Or worse, they get bold. Keeping a layer of unpredictability keeps them engaged and on guard. Look at how powerful leaders throughout history used unpredictability to stay ahead. Genghis Khan was known for mercy at times and unimaginable brutality at others. No one could predict him, and that made him terrifying. Steve Jobs, though controversial, was famously erratic in his decisions, which created a culture of excellence and vigilance. Subordinates never knew whether they'd be praised or challenged, and so they constantly stayed sharp. Routine might feel safe for you, but it creates opportunity for your opponents. The more you follow habits and traditions blindly, the easier you are to outmaneuver. Patterns are comforting to you, but they're tools in the hands of those who want to bring you down. So examine your leadership. What behaviors are others taking for granted? What reactions have become predictable? Where can you introduce just enough variance to make others think twice? In power, fear isn't always created by what you do. It's created by the uncertainty of what you might do. Delegate unpopular tasks to others, then take credit for resolution. One of Machiavelli's most underhanded yet effective strategies is simple. Let others do the dirty work, then step in as the hero. This isn't just smart politics. It's psychological manipulation at its finest. It separates you from the backlash while still allowing you to bask in the success. People have long memories when it comes to pain, punishment, or loss. If you make a tough decision, fire someone, enforce unpopular policies, raise fees, your name becomes associated with negativity, even if the decision was necessary. But if someone else carries out the decision and you later appear to resolve it or step in with empathy, you come out looking strong and fair. It's calculated optics. This principle was perfectly illustrated in Machiavelli's example of Cesare Borgia. When Borgia took control of Romagna, he needed to impose harsh discipline. He delegated this to a cruel enforcer, Ramiro de Orco. Once order was restored, Cesare had the man executed and put on public display, signaling that he disapproved of the cruelty even though he had ordered it. The people, now safe and grateful, praised Cesare's justice. A textbook Machiavellian move. In today's context, this strategy thrives in corporate leadership. Imagine a CEO needs to lay off a department. Instead of delivering the message, the task is given to HR or a VP. After the dust settles, the CEO sends a heartfelt message about tough times and appreciation for everyone's work. People forget the decision came from the top. They associate the pain with the messenger and the healing with the leader. The key here is psychological distancing. You allow someone else to become the face of the unpopular action. Then, when it's over, you show up as the restorer of balance. This way, people see you as both authoritative and compassionate. This also works with structural changes. Say you need to implement strict new rules. Let your team leads deliver them. Let them take the heat. Later, you can adjust or review those rules slightly and appear responsive. You still get the outcome, but without carrying the public burden of enforcement. However, there's a caveat. Don't throw your subordinates under the bus entirely. The person you delegate to should know their role. Make them feel honored or strategically chosen, even if they bear the brunt. If they sense they're expendable, they might turn on you or expose the plan. This strategy, when executed well, enhances your image without exposing you to the dirt. People want to see strength and justice from leaders, but they don't want to see cruelty. Use that. Be the hand that heals, not the one that punishes, even if you control both. In the game of power, credit is everything, and so is distance from blame. Delegate the unpopular. Own the success. A reputation for ruthlessness keeps enemies in check. Power invites challengers. Always. And the only thing more effective than punishing rebellion is making people fear even the thought of it. That's where a reputation for ruthlessness comes in, not just the act itself, but the reputation of being willing to act without mercy. This isn't about being cruel for cruelty's sake. It's about managing perception. If people know you're capable of swift, decisive, and severe action when threatened, they are far less likely to test your boundaries. A reputation for ruthlessness becomes a form of psychological armor. It deters betrayal before it begins. Machiavelli noted that cruelty, when used wisely and sparingly, can serve the long-term health of the state or the leader. It communicates that while you may be fair, you are not weak. You can be kind, but if crossed, you will not hesitate to strike. That balance between being respected and being feared is at the heart of enduring power. Consider the impact of a leader who is lenient to a fault. They forgive disloyalty, overlook insubordination, and offer second chances to those who undermine them. Over time, those around them grow bolder. Why? Because there's no fear of consequences. Eventually, someone takes that generosity as an invitation to seize power. Softness without the threat of strength invites predators. Now contrast that with a leader known for punishing betrayal instantly and publicly. Even those tempted to rebel will think twice. The potential cost is too high. That's the effect of a ruthless reputation. It multiplies your strength without having to constantly use it. But reputation must be built carefully. If you're ruthless without cause, you're seen as cruel. If you're too forgiving, you're seen as weak. The Machiavellian sweet spot is this: be as merciful as possible, but make examples when necessary, and make them unforgettable. The execution of traitors, the firing of disloyal team members, the exposure of manipulators. These are moments to demonstrate ruthlessness, not for revenge, but to signal to everyone else, crossing me is a fatal error. It also helps to let the story spread. You don't need to repeat the punishment. Just let the tale echo. The myth of your severity will do half the work. People fear what they believe you might do more than what you've already done. You must understand this isn't about being heartless. It's about being strategic with fear. In leadership, fear is a tool. Without it, love and respect crumble under stress. But with it, your authority gains a steel spine. In short, be fair, but feared. Be just, but not gentle. If they know you won't flinch when it matters most, they'll never dare test you. Choose loyalty over talent. It's easier to control. Machiavelli's political insight was not only about wielding power, but about preserving it. And one of his sharpest observations was this: it's far better to surround yourself with loyal people than with merely talented ones. Why? Because talent without loyalty is a potential threat. But loyalty, even from the less brilliant, ensures that your position stays secure. Let's look at the heart of the idea. Talented individuals often know their value. They become ambitious, self-serving, and hard to predict. If their goals begin to diverge from yours, they may feel justified in undermining your authority or seeking your place. In contrast, loyal individuals, those who genuinely believe in your leadership, will prioritize your vision over their own advancement. They're more likely to follow orders, maintain stability, and defend your name when it matters. Machiavelli understood this dynamic deeply. In the ever-changing courts of Renaissance Italy, many rulers were overthrown by the very advisors or generals they had promoted because of brilliance alone. These gifted individuals, when left unchecked, could amass influence, build personal alliances, and eventually become power bases in their own right. Without loyalty to the leader, their talent became a liability. Consider the corporate world. Companies often face this dilemma. Do you promote the most skilled executive, even if they have a history of pushing boundaries, questioning authority, and prioritizing personal gain? Or do you elevate the person who may be less flashy, but who consistently supports the team, protects company values, and has your back during tough decisions? Machiavelli would point firmly to the latter. In power dynamics, predictability and trust often outweigh raw ability. Now, this doesn't mean ignoring competence altogether. A completely loyal but incompetent team can drag down an organization. But when forced to choose, especially in critical roles, it's better to bet on loyalty and invest in developing their skills than to elevate a star who might one day outshine or overthrow you. This principle also plays out in military contexts. Armies have long known that morale and loyalty win wars as much as technology or tactics. A talented soldier who questions every command can fracture unity, but a loyal one follows orders even under pressure, ensuring cohesion. Machiavelli wasn't idealistic about human nature. He assumed that people act in their own interest unless deeply tied to yours. That's why he advocated rewarding loyalty publicly and punishing betrayal decisively, because once your inner circle sees that faithfulness is protected and treachery is fatal, they fall into alignment. Even in personal life, this principle holds. You may have a brilliant friend or partner who constantly tests boundaries or plays power games. Over time, that brilliance becomes exhausting. But someone who is steady, supportive, and reliable, even if not exceptional, provides peace of mind. And in high-stakes situations, peace of mind is worth more than brilliance. In the end, talent is like fire. It can warm, but it can also burn. Loyalty, on the other hand, is like armor. It may not shine, but it keeps you safe. Punish once, harshly, then move forward. Few ideas in The Prince are as blunt and psychologically effective as Machiavelli's doctrine on punishment. When you must punish, do it once, do it harshly, and then move on. It's not just about deterrence. It's about control, closure, and signaling. Let's unpack this. When a leader doles out punishment gradually or repeatedly, they foster fear, resentment, and instability. The target never knows when the next blow is coming. They begin to plot revenge. Meanwhile, onlookers perceive the leader as cruel, unpredictable, or indecisive. But when punishment is delivered swiftly, decisively, and only once, it becomes a powerful moment of clarity. People understand the boundary, the consequences, and that it won't be dragged into a prolonged ordeal. Harshness has a purpose. It sends a clear message. It tells everyone watching that certain behaviors will not be tolerated. It communicates strength, resolve, and finality. It removes the illusion that there's room for negotiation or leniency when core rules are broken. Take, for example, historical rulers who faced rebellion. The ones who crushed the uprising immediately, without dragging it out or issuing repeated half-measures, often secured peace more quickly. The severity of their actions shocked people into compliance, and because they didn't dwell on it, society was allowed to heal. In contrast, leaders who issued a string of minor punishments gave dissenters time to regroup and morale to collapse. In a modern setting, the same logic applies. A leader in an organization might face a serious betrayal, a leak of sensitive information, insubordination, or sabotage. A weak leader will begin with verbal warnings, then probation, then public shaming. This not only damages morale, but also creates spectacle. A strong leader takes clear action, firing the person quickly and firmly, making the reasons clear, and then shifting attention to progress. It's also about dignity. A prolonged punishment humiliates the target and creates sympathy for them, but a sharp, clean punishment leaves no room for martyrdom. It signals closure. Everyone can move on without the lingering drama. Machiavelli's genius was understanding how fear works. Fear must be controlled. Too little, and it doesn't prevent bad behavior. Too much, and it breeds rebellion. The once harshly principle is the midpoint. It's impactful enough to change behavior, but rare enough to avoid tyranny. There's a psychological element here, too. Human beings are hardwired to respond to clear boundaries. When consequences are ambiguous, people test limits. When consequences are swift and unmistakable, they adapt quickly. This approach, while tough, actually reduces the need for future punishments. People know where the lines are drawn, and they stay within them. In personal relationships, this might look like ending a toxic connection with clarity rather than a series of dramatic confrontations. In parenting, it might mean one firm response instead of nagging or empty threats. The point isn't cruelty, it's resolution. In Machiavelli's world and in ours, power isn't just about who you punish, it's how you punish. Make it count, make it known, then move on like it never happened. The silence afterward is what people remember. Guard your words. They can be weapons or weaknesses. To Machiavelli, words are not just tools of communication. They are instruments of power, risk, and persuasion. In The Prince, he often implies that the things we say can either elevate us or destroy us, depending on timing, audience, and context. This philosophy, guard your words, is not about silence for its own sake, but about control. The less you say, the fewer weapons your enemies have to use against you. Words, once spoken, cannot be taken back. They become evidence. They spark rumors. They can inflame opponents or inspire uprisings. Machiavelli recognized that leaders, especially, must treat language as carefully as a general treats strategy. One loose sentence can undo years of planning. One impulsive statement can expose weakness, invite scrutiny, or betray your real intentions. Think about how often people talk themselves into trouble, at work, in politics, or even within families. A casual complaint overheard by the wrong person, a boast that reveals insecurity, a half-truth that snowballs into chaos. Machiavelli's world was filled with betrayal, espionage, and factional wars. In such a climate, talk was dangerous, but this advice isn't only about caution, it's also about opportunity. If words can be weaknesses, they can also be weapons. The key lies in knowing when to speak, what to say, and who to say it to. Well-timed words can disarm an enemy, seduce a crowd, or mislead a rival. They can create illusions of strength, sow confusion, or elevate your status. This is why Machiavelli admired the leaders who could master rhetoric, not just to rally support, but to conceal their deeper motives. Caesar, Napoleon, and other power figures knew that words could be used to misdirect attention while the real moves happened elsewhere. For those in their 40s, 50s, and beyond, those with careers full of negotiations, betrayals, tough decisions, this lesson hits close to home. You've seen what happens when someone talks too much in a meeting, leaks plans too early, or vents emotions in front of the wrong people. You've learned, through experience, that silence can be strength. and that listening often reveals more than speaking. Machiavelli would advise leaders to say less than necessary, especially when emotions run high, because the more you talk, the more likely you are to expose your fears, your gaps in knowledge, or your true agenda. Every word is a potential liability. But there's a sharper edge to this. He'd also encourage you to use other people's words as weapons against them. Pay attention to what people say when they're off guard. Let them reveal too much. Let their words define them, while yours remain measured, strategic, and rare. A Machiavellian leader doesn't avoid speech. He masters it. He understands that every conversation is an opportunity for control, for deception, or for advantage, but only if the words are chosen with the precision of a blade. So guard your speech like a fortress. Speak less, listen more, and when you speak, make it count. Align with public sentiment while planning in the shadows. Machiavelli was a master of double layers. One of his most potent philosophies is the art of aligning with public sentiment while secretly planning in the shadows. This is not hypocrisy, it's strategy. Power depends not just on what is done, but how it's perceived. A leader must appear to reflect the values and desires of the people, even as he quietly shapes an agenda they may not yet understand or accept. In The Prince, Machiavelli returns again and again to the idea that rulers must maintain the appearance of virtue. The public loves strength, justice, humility, and patriotism. A wise leader, he says, should adopt these appearances like armor, even if, behind the scenes, he is making cold, tactical moves that serve power rather than principle. The trick is knowing that the people want to feel heard, not necessarily to understand the full complexity of governance. By aligning with their surface desires, talking about fairness, justice, or tradition, a ruler can win loyalty and suppress dissent. Meanwhile, in private, he can make the real moves, shifting alliances, suppressing rivals, rewriting the rules. This strategy is visible in nearly every major political figure throughout history. Take Franklin D. Roosevelt, who presented himself as a champion of the people, all while executing some of the most centralized, top-down transformations of federal power in U.S. history. Or, more cynically, think of how authoritarian leaders cloak their power grabs in the language of national pride, morality, or economic stability. But this lesson isn't just for presidents and kings. In business, social circles, and family dynamics, this philosophy is alive and well. The boss who supports a people-first culture while streamlining layoffs in private. The colleague who champions teamwork in meetings while building their personal power base after hours. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's simply what survival requires. To those in midlife and beyond, this is a truth you've likely encountered. People want the illusion of inclusion, even when decisions are made elsewhere, and those who lead successfully often carry the weight of unspoken truths. You learn to smile and nod, to let others believe they've won, even as you quietly prepare your next move. Machiavelli's genius is in naming this dynamic without shame. He doesn't view it as deceit, but as wisdom. Because if you reveal your true intentions too soon, or appear out of sync with the public, you lose the mandate to act. And without that mandate, power slips away. So the smart leader learns to speak to the crowd in their language while building something else behind the curtain. He becomes a mirror of the people's hopes, while quietly ensuring those hopes serve his greater goal. Public sentiment is like the wind. You don't fight it, you sail with it, all the while steering your ship wherever you want it to go. Disguise ambition as duty. Machiavelli understood a core truth about human psychology. People are far more comfortable following someone who claims to serve the greater good than someone who openly seeks power. That's why one of his most effective power principles is to disguise ambition as duty. If you want to rise, whether in politics, business, or any social arena, don't announce your ambitions. Wrap them in the language of responsibility, service, or necessity. People will follow a servant. They'll resist a climber. Throughout history, those who reached the top often masked their true motives behind a facade of obligation. Julius Caesar claimed he crossed the Rubicon not to seize power, but to defend the rights of the Roman people and restore order. In truth, he was making a bold move toward dictatorship, but by presenting it as a patriotic necessity, he turned a controversial coup into a national mission. This tactic works because ambition, when exposed, often breeds fear or resentment. People are naturally suspicious of those who want too much. They wonder, will they betray me? Will they overreach? Will I lose power if they gain it? But when someone appears to be stepping up out of duty because they have no choice, people lower their defenses. They even cheer it on. In modern corporate life, this lesson plays out constantly. A leader may accept a promotion reluctantly, claiming they were asked to take over during a tough time. They'll say, "I didn't want this job, but the team needs me." In reality, they've been maneuvering for months, but because the move looks selfless, it's accepted, even admired. This isn't just about manipulation, it's strategy. Because in Machiavellian thinking, outcomes matter more than appearances, and if appearing dutiful gets you into a position of power, then the act was justified. Think of how this plays into leadership during crisis. The person who rises in an emergency, acting out of necessity, often gains enormous influence. If they appear hesitant, even better. It sells the illusion. But behind the scenes, the most effective among them were already prepared. They waited for the right moment, stepped in for the good of the team, and used the chaos as a launch pad. For people in midlife, especially those who've led teams, families, or organizations, this lesson rings true. You've seen colleagues hide their personal goals behind the veil of service. You've likely done it yourself, not out of deceit, but because you understood that pushing your ambition openly would trigger resistance. But couch it in responsibility and doors open. Disguising ambition as duty isn't about lying. It's about understanding how to frame your rise. Present your leadership as a sacrifice, not a conquest. Let others believe you're reluctantly stepping up for their sake. They'll support you, sometimes even defend you, without realizing they've helped you climb. This is Machiavellian elegance, rising with power, cloaked in humility. Show strength. When questioned, even if you're uncertain. Machiavelli knew that confidence is power, and sometimes it's the illusion of strength, not the reality, that determines whether you win a confrontation or lose control. His principle here is simple but powerful. Never show uncertainty when you're being questioned. So, project strength, even if you're unsure. Why? Because doubt is contagious. When people see hesitation in a leader, they begin to doubt everything, your decisions, your authority, your competence. But if you speak with certainty, even in chaos, they'll follow. Because when the world feels unstable, people crave certainty, not accuracy. This idea has been reinforced by history again and again. Consider Winston Churchill during World War II. Britain stood alone against a Nazi onslaught. Internally, Churchill may have known the odds were grim, but outwardly he radiated defiance and confidence. We shall never surrender. That conviction wasn't rooted in certainty of victory. It was a weapon to keep morale alive. In business, this plays out every day. A CEO standing before investors or a board can't afford to look unsure, even if profits are falling and plans are shaky. A calm, confident delivery, paired with clear action points, can buy time, restore faith, and keep a company afloat through turbulence. Confidence doesn't replace substance, but it protects it. But here's what makes this Machiavellian. It's not about lying. It's about managing perception. You can feel uncertainty. You can privately wrestle with doubt. But when questioned, you control the narrative. You speak clearly. You assert. You lead. And when needed, you buy time to find the real answer. In interpersonal relationships, this is just as important. Have you ever noticed how people test boundaries when they sense weakness? A child who sees a parent hesitate about discipline. An employee who challenges a boss because they seem unsure. Or a rival who escalates the moment they spot fear. It's human nature. Perceived weakness invites challenge. Perceived strength, even if manufactured, builds space for stability. But this lesson isn't about arrogance. You don't bulldoze or shout down every question. You speak with calm clarity. You act with assurance. And if you don't have the answer, you say, "We're moving forward with Plan A while reviewing new data. I'll share an update soon." That's not evasion. It's tactical control. You lead the conversation instead of reacting to it. By midlife, most people have already learned this lesson through hard experience. A moment of visible doubt in a meeting that undermined their authority. A stumble in leadership that let someone else step into their space. And so, over time, they've learned, when in doubt, stand tall. Let the face be confident, even when the mind is uncertain. Machiavelli would approve. Because in a world where perception shapes influence, the appearance of strength is strength, at least long enough to buy time, recover footing, and retake control. Isolate your rivals through alliances, not confrontation. Machiavelli's approach to power wasn't about brute force. It was about surgical strikes. One of his most brilliant strategies is to weaken your enemies not by attacking them head-on, but by surrounding them with alliances. Cut off their options, erode their support, and make them irrelevant, not through war, but through isolation. It's a tactic as old as empire building. Don't fight your enemy. Make sure no one wants to fight with them. Direct confrontation is risky. It turns you into a villain. It draws attention. And it may even unite your rival's supporters. But if you can quietly pull their allies away by offering them more, by promising safety, by exploiting existing grievances, you can collapse your rival's position without firing a shot. This is classic divide and conquer. But Machiavelli's twist is to use alliances as your weapon, not just division. Build strategic friendships. Support your rival's enemies. Strengthen everyone around them until they're boxed in, politically or socially. When they're isolated, their options shrink. Their voice weakens, and their power fades. In political history, this strategy is everywhere. During the Renaissance, Italian city-states constantly shifted alliances. A prince wouldn't invade his enemy's land. He'd fund their rivals' campaign, seduce their generals, or negotiate treaties with their neighbors. One day, the enemy would find themselves alone, and then powerless. Even in global politics, the same pattern holds. The U.S. didn't attack the Soviet Union directly during the Cold War. Instead, it built NATO. It formed economic and military alliances that surrounded the USSR, slowly eroding its influence until internal pressure brought it down. In a corporate setting, this lesson is gold. If you're contending with a rival for leadership, don't confront them publicly. Instead, form bonds with other teams, key stakeholders, or departments. Support their initiatives. Share credit. Offer value. Over time, those relationships become your shield and your sword. When your rival tries to push back, they'll find themselves standing alone. What makes this tactic so effective is its subtlety. Your rival may not even see it happening until it's too late. And from the outside, you don't look aggressive. You look cooperative, team-oriented, loyal. Meanwhile, the reality is, you've just built a wall around your enemy without anyone realizing it. People in their 40s to 60s often come to appreciate this method more deeply. You've seen how direct conflict often backfires, leading to politics, grudges, and division. But alliances? Those are clean, smart, and lethal when used right. So instead of swinging a sword, Machiavelli says, build bridges, not to cross, but to trap. Use loyalty to disarm. Use diplomacy to surround. And when the rival finally looks around and sees no allies left, that's when their fall becomes inevitable. Burn bridges behind you if it prevents retreat. Machiavelli never advocated for recklessness, but he did believe in commitment. In his world, indecision was dangerous. One of his boldest lessons is the idea that sometimes you must burn the bridges behind you, removing the option to retreat, so you have no choice but to move forward or win. Why would anyone willingly destroy their fallback plan? Because when retreat is possible, hesitation is inevitable. But when there's no way back, people tap into strength, courage, and creativity they didn't know they had. Machiavelli saw this tactic not only as a psychological strategy, but as a practical one, especially in times of crisis or conquest. This principle traces back even further to ancient military doctrine. Generals would burn their own ships upon landing in enemy territory, signaling to their soldiers, "There is no escape. We fight or we die." The result? A fierce, focused army with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Victory often followed. Burning bridges is not about drama. It's about eliminating the comfort of reversal. When you make a difficult decision, leaving a toxic job, ending a dead relationship, walking away from a bad deal, it's easy to keep the door cracked open. But that crack invites second-guessing. It weakens your resolve. Machiavelli's version of power demands finality. Leaders who hesitate inspire doubt. Followers can sense when you're not fully committed. And worse, opponents will exploit that indecision. But if you burn the bridge, people understand. You are all in. That energy is contagious. In modern life, this could mean cutting ties with an old network that holds you back. It could mean walking away from a former business model that no longer serves your growth. It might even mean telling people you're pursuing something new, so the pressure of public commitment forces you to follow through. People in their 40s to 60s know this struggle well. Many have spent years caught between decisions, half in, half out, hoping conditions improve. But the cost of indecision is often greater than the cost of failure. Machiavelli would say, choose a path and commit with no exit strategy. That's where transformation lives. And there's power in sending a message to others, but also to yourself. Burning the bridge says, I trust myself enough to make this work. I will not run. I will not retreat. This is the way forward. Stir division among your enemies. They won't unite against you. Machiavelli was a master at understanding the dynamics of power between groups. One of his shrewdest lessons is this: if your enemies are divided, they cannot defeat you. So don't just wait for division, stir it. This idea is deeply strategic. Conflict is natural between competing groups, but the real danger arises when those groups find common cause against you. Machiavelli's insight: keep them so busy fighting each other, they'll never turn their attention to you. He observed this firsthand in the city-states of Renaissance Italy. Nobles, clergy, merchants, all with competing interests. Whenever one faction tried to dominate, the smart ruler would quietly support its rivals, ensuring no single enemy could become too powerful. By keeping them occupied with their own ambitions, he protected his own. This tactic is not just about manipulation, it's about survival. Even today, in politics, business, or interpersonal conflicts, a unified opposition is the most dangerous kind. So if you can prevent alliances by planting doubt, highlighting disagreements, or encouraging rivalries, you remove the threat before it fully forms. Consider a corporate example. Two competitors might both threaten your market share. Instead of confronting them directly, you highlight their differences, spark competitive tension, or feed rumors about each other's intentions. While they're focused on outmaneuvering each other, you expand unchallenged. In social situations, this plays out subtly. If you know two people dislike each other, you can often prevent them from teaming up against you. Just being aware of their differences and ensuring those differences stay in focus can keep you off their radar. It's not about lying, it's about understanding group psychology and leveraging it. The tactic even appears in national politics. Dividing a population along cultural, economic, or ideological lines often prevents unified resistance to leadership. It's a dark truth, but one that powerful figures throughout history have used to maintain control. Machiavelli's point isn't that division is good, it's that division is useful, especially when the alternative is being the target of a strong, united front. And this isn't just about groups. It applies to individuals too. If you sense two colleagues may conspire against you, subtly drawing attention to their differences, ideologically, professionally, personally, can keep them from aligning. It's the art of distraction over confrontation. For those in midlife, this lesson is familiar. You've seen people unite against a common threat or break apart over minor issues. You've witnessed how fragile alliances are. And maybe you've even seen how the most skilled people don't fight battles head-on. They let others weaken each other first. If you want to survive, divide. If you want to win, make sure your enemies can't even see each other clearly, let alone agree on how to stop you. Control information. Knowledge is leverage. To Machiavelli, information wasn't just knowledge, it was leverage. The person who controls what others know, when they know it, and how they interpret it, holds invisible power over their actions, decisions, and alliances. In politics, military strategy, and leadership, information is often the most decisive asset. Not troops, not money, not even loyalty, just the right knowledge at the right time. Control over information means controlling narrative. If people only see one version of the truth, they react according to that version. If you can shape the story, what's said, what's silenced, what's emphasized, you shape the reality they respond to. This applies to history and modern life. In wartime, intelligence wins battles. Knowing enemy positions, intentions, and vulnerabilities allows you to strike strategically. In corporate life, internal data, sales figures, customer behavior, operational weaknesses can be weaponized or protected, depending on who holds it. But Machiavelli also understood something deeper. The person who distributes information holds power over those who receive it. That's why controlling access is so critical. Transparency may sound noble, but in a competitive world, it's often a disadvantage. Once people know everything, you've given away your advantage. Information can create fear, trust, chaos, or unity. Want to inspire fear? Leak just enough of a threat to make people second-guess their position. Want to build loyalty? Share exclusive knowledge that makes someone feel trusted. Want to control a room? Be the one with more data than anyone else, and let that be known without ever revealing your full hand. For example, in a workplace environment, a person who's seen as in the loop automatically gains influence. People defer to them. They control discussions. Their silence carries weight. Meanwhile, someone who speaks too openly, who shows all their cards, loses leverage fast. Machiavelli would say, guard information like a weapon. Speak less than you know. Disclose only what strengthens your position, and always know more than the people around you. This is not about dishonesty. It's about discretion, about understanding that in every relationship, data is power, and power needs protection. In today's hyper-connected world, this lesson is more relevant than ever. From social media to corporate leaks to political campaigns, the battle for who gets to tell the story is a battle for control itself. Those in their 40s to 60s have seen how information changes everything. A secret revealed, a truth distorted, a detail withheld. Each can shift the entire course of a business, a relationship, or a reputation. Machiavelli's message is simple. Don't just seek knowledge. Control it. Let others guess while you guide. Let others talk while you listen. The more you know and the less you reveal, the stronger your position becomes. Reward loyalty publicly to encourage obedience. Machiavelli understood one of the most powerful truths of leadership. People respond not just to reward, but to recognition. When someone is loyal, especially in difficult times, and you reward them in the shadows, the benefit is limited. But when you celebrate their loyalty publicly, you send a message far beyond the individual. You shape the culture around you. You let everyone watching know, this is what earns my favor. This is what gets rewarded. In The Prince, Machiavelli makes it clear that a ruler must be generous, but not foolishly so. Lavish private rewards can backfire, breeding jealousy or entitlement. But public recognition becomes a strategic signal. It costs little, but it generates immense value. The act of rewarding loyalty in front of others reinforces a structure of incentives. Do the right thing, and you too will be acknowledged. This isn't sentiment, it's calculated influence. Let's bring this into modern life. Think of a manager who quietly gives a loyal team member a bonus. That's nice, but no one else knows. The message doesn't spread. Now contrast that with a leader who, during a meeting, stops the room to acknowledge that same team member's commitment in front of peers, clients, and upper management. Suddenly, that act becomes a powerful motivator to everyone in the room. It doesn't just boost the recipient, it defines a standard. Machiavelli would argue that loyalty itself becomes a currency when it's rewarded openly. And the more people perceive that loyalty leads to tangible status, the more they'll work to demonstrate it. This isn't about building friendships. It's about orchestrating obedience through positive reinforcement. It's behavioral conditioning, not emotional bonding. There is also a deeper psychological play at work. People want to be seen. As we age, especially in professional settings, the desire for recognition often outweighs the desire for material reward. For an audience in their 40s to 60s who've spent decades proving themselves, it's not about the money anymore. It's about respect, credibility, legacy. Machiavelli knew how to use that desire. Public rewards elevate not only the loyalist, but also the leader who bestows them. It reinforces the image of the wise, just ruler who recognizes value when he sees it. But Machiavelli would add this: don't be careless. Public reward should never feel routine or forced. If you praise everyone, it means nothing. If you over-reward, it dilutes the value. Timing and authenticity of delivery are key. It must feel earned, strategic, even rare. So whether it's a promotion, a ceremonial gesture, or a symbolic gesture like a handwritten note or a spotlight moment, when you reward loyalty publicly, you do more than thank someone. You teach your kingdom what earns your favor. And once that system is visible, people will fight to stay on the right side of it. Accept that some betrayals are necessary to grow. Few truths are more brutal and more liberating than this one. Not all relationships are meant to last, and some must be sacrificed to advance. Machiavelli never shied away from this idea. To him, betrayal wasn't a sin. It was often a step forward. This isn't about being heartless or impulsive. Machiavelli understood that loyalty is valuable until it becomes a liability. And when someone stands in the way of your survival, your power, or your progress, clinging to them out of sentiment is weakness. Growth requires hard decisions. Sometimes that means letting go of allies who no longer align with your purpose. Sometimes it means severing ties with mentors, business partners, or friends whose loyalty has turned into entitlement, or worse, resistance. One of the clearest examples from The Prince is Cesare Borgia's betrayal of his own lieutenant, Ramiro de Lorca. Ramiro was ruthless, and Cesare used him to crush rebellion. But once the people began to hate Ramiro, Cesare publicly executed him, shifting the blame for cruelty away from himself while winning back public support. It was a cold betrayal, but a brilliant strategic move. Cesare understood that loyalty is transactional in the game of power. And this holds true in real life. At some point in every career or personal journey, you will outgrow the people who once helped you. A co-founder who refuses to evolve. A family member who manipulates your progress. A friend who sabotages you out of jealousy. When these relationships stop serving your mission, the cost of keeping them becomes higher than the cost of cutting them loose. Now, Machiavelli wouldn't suggest reckless betrayal. It must be calculated, timed, and ultimately beneficial. Betrayal without benefit is simply treachery, but betrayal that creates new space for leadership, opportunity, or protection of the greater good, that's not evil. That's evolution. This is especially relevant for those in their 40s and 50s, people who have long-term attachments, deep relationships, and a more nuanced understanding of loyalty. At this stage, you've likely realized that protecting old alliances at all costs can keep you small. That growth sometimes means walking away, not with rage, but with clarity. It also means recognizing betrayal when it's done to you. Machiavelli would advise you not to be shocked by it. People act in their self-interest. The mistake isn't being betrayed. It's not being prepared for it. Accept betrayal as part of the climb. Prepare for it. And if necessary, use it. Because sometimes the very thing that breaks your old structure is what clears the way for your empire. Don't appear too intelligent. Make others feel superior. In a world driven by hierarchy, pride, and subtle rivalry, appearing too intelligent is one of the quickest ways to make powerful people uncomfortable and potentially hostile. Machiavelli didn't just preach ruthlessness and deception. He also taught the delicate art of social survival. One of his most profound lessons: let others believe they're smarter than you, even when they're not. Why would intelligence, something so universally praised, become a liability? Because intelligence, when flashed too obviously, threatens ego. Especially in powerful circles, most people don't want to be surrounded by those who might outshine them. They want competence, but only as long as it serves them, not as a reminder of their own limitations. This is where strategic humility becomes a tool of power. The smart Machiavellian knows how to dial down visible intellect, especially in rooms dominated by fragile egos. You don't need to always offer the best idea in the meeting. Instead, you might whisper it to someone else and let them present it. You still shape the outcome, but you remain in the background, non-threatening, cooperative, supportive. There's also a psychological layer here. People like those who make them feel smart. When you subtly elevate others' ideas, ask their opinions, or act as though their insight is more profound than yours, you trigger their desire to protect and include you. This creates a sense of loyalty, and ironically, puts you in a better position to influence them over time. Look at history. Some of the most influential advisors, strategists, and power brokers weren't kings or commanders. They were the quiet ones in the shadows. They let rulers believe they held the wisdom, while they guided decisions from behind the scenes. Machiavelli himself was this kind of figure. He didn't wear a crown, but his ideas shaped entire regimes. The art is in concealing the blade behind a smile. Your intelligence is your weapon, but it doesn't always belong on display. Speak in terms others understand. Simplify your insights. Ask questions even when you know the answer. Let others win arguments you could easily destroy, if the win benefits your position. But let's be clear, this isn't about dumbing yourself down. It's about calibrating your presence so that others don't feel threatened. You remain in control, but they believe they are. That illusion keeps them comfortable and predictable. A Machiavellian mind always knows who to impress, who to flatter, and who to stay beneath. Over time, as others grow complacent in your presence, you accumulate influence without attracting resistance. You're the invisible architect, the subtle manipulator, the unseen strategist behind every decision they think was theirs. And when the moment finally comes to act, no one sees it coming, because you were never the smartest person in the room, or so they thought. Never appear desperate. Power favors the calm. Desperation is the scent of weakness. And power, like a wild predator, is drawn to vulnerability. In Machiavellian thinking, showing desperation is one of the fastest ways to lose influence, trust, and control. Whether you're in negotiations, conflict, leadership, or persuasion, you must maintain the appearance of calm. Even if everything inside you is on fire. Why is this so important? Because people don't respond to actual power. They respond to the image of power. And desperation shatters that image. It suggests you're out of options, short on time, or reliant on others. That makes you easy to ignore, manipulate, or overpower. Calm, on the other hand, is magnetic. It signals control. It says, I have time, I have resources, I don't need to rush, because I'm not cornered. And whether it's true or not, projecting that aura shifts the power dynamic in your favor. Imagine two people in a negotiation. One pleads for a deal, explaining why they need it badly. The other listens silently, offering little emotion, even less urgency. Who holds the advantage? Always the one who seems like they could walk away at any time. That composure becomes leverage. The desperate party, no matter how intelligent or honest, begins negotiating from a place of inferiority. This applies in relationships too. The person who appears emotionally dependent, constantly seeking validation, loses power. The one who stays calm, mysterious, and self-contained draws people in. Not because they're cold, but because they don't need. And humans are psychologically drawn to what seems scarce and self-sufficient. Even in crisis, especially in crisis, calm is a weapon. Look at strong leaders in history. Winston Churchill, during the bombings of London, didn't scream or panic. He spoke calmly, defiantly, as though victory was inevitable. That calm rallied a nation. The panic of leadership spreads faster than any policy, while composure becomes a form of strength people rally behind. But how do you fake calm when you're under pressure? You control your body language. Keep still. Lower your voice. Pause before responding. Maintain steady eye contact. You also control your choices. Don't rush to respond to every slight, every message, every change in fortune. Power lies in restraint. Let others reveal their hand while you sit silent. The more reactive someone is, the more readable they become. The calm person remains unreadable and therefore dangerous. This doesn't mean being passive or weak. Quite the opposite. Calmness must come with quiet certainty. People must believe that you are calculating, not frozen, that you are waiting, not lost. Machiavelli would say, when you're at your weakest, appear calm. When you're at your strongest, appear calm. Because desperation, even if justified, will make your enemies circle and your allies question you. Never let them see the sweat, because in power, as in war, stillness is mistaken for confidence, and confidence wins battles before they begin. Hide your strategy in layers of simplicity. One of the most brilliant principles of Machiavellian power is the idea that the best strategies are invisible. That doesn't mean doing nothing, it means appearing as if you're doing nothing. A true master of control doesn't boast about their intelligence or telegraph their next move. Instead, they wrap complex plans in plain packaging so no one sees the machinery behind the curtain. Machiavelli understood that people are often suspicious of what they don't understand. Show too much cleverness, and others grow uneasy. They begin to probe, question, resist. But if your actions seem simple, obvious, even mundane, people relax. They underestimate you, and that's where your real advantage lies. This is the art of strategic concealment. A hidden strategy doesn't mean secrecy, it means camouflage. It means doing complex calculations in private while presenting calm, straightforward decisions in public. It means letting others believe your success came from luck, not design. That illusion protects you from envy, scrutiny, and sabotage. Think of a chess player who sacrifices a pawn, not by accident, but to bait the opponent. If the sacrifice is dressed in clumsiness, the opponent takes the bait. If it's too obvious, they hesitate. In power dynamics, it's the same. If you're maneuvering to remove a rival, expand your influence, or consolidate resources, don't explain your plan. Wrap it in a decision that appears routine. Historical leaders mastered this technique. FDR's New Deal reforms were packaged as economic recovery efforts, but embedded in them were structural shifts that redefined American government. Deng Xiaoping opened China to capitalism under the slogan, "Socialism with Chinese characteristics," a label so broad and ambiguous it deflected scrutiny while the real shift unfolded. Even in business, this concept thrives. Consider how Apple launches products. The presentation is clean, simple, intuitive. But behind that simplicity lies an incredibly complex operation: supply chains, innovation labs, marketing strategy, psychological pricing. Yet none of that is visible to the average consumer. The simplicity is the strategy. This principle also protects you. When your strategy is hidden, your vulnerabilities stay hidden too. If people don't fully understand what you're doing, they can't disrupt it. They can't predict your next move, and because they think they understand you, they stop watching closely. That's when you gain the most ground. In social settings, this works just as powerfully. Someone who plays the fool, who acts light-hearted, disinterested, unthreatening, can learn far more than someone who tries to dominate the room. When people think you're simple, they drop their guard. They talk too much. They give away their own strategies, and all the while, you're working silently behind the scenes. Machiavelli would remind us, never confuse visibility with power. Real power often moves silently, dressed in banality. Let others think your steps are small, your mind unremarkable, your ambition modest. By the time they realize your true intentions, it's too late. The game is already won. Let others believe they influence you, while you steer everything. Influence is a funny thing. Most people crave it, not just over events, but over other people. They want to feel important, listened to, valued. Machiavelli saw this human need clearly, and he understood how to use it. One of his most subtle yet powerful lessons is this: let others believe they're steering the ship while you hold the wheel underneath. It's a brilliant inversion of power. On the surface, you appear cooperative, open-minded, even deferential. Behind the scenes, you guide outcomes toward your goals. You win people's loyalty and achieve control without triggering resistance. This is how real manipulation works, not through force, but through suggestion. People are far more likely to support an idea if they think it was theirs. They resist being dictated to, but they embrace the feeling of ownership. A wise leader, therefore, plants ideas gently, guides conversations subtly, and allows others to think they've made the final call. It's the advisor who makes a decision seem like the boss's idea. It's the partner who nudges a spouse toward a change while giving them credit for the realization. It's the negotiator who leads their counterpart to a conclusion that was pre-planned. This is high-level influence, and it's how empires are quietly shaped. Why is this effective? Because it plays directly into ego. Everyone wants to feel smart. Everyone wants to be heard. If you challenge someone directly, even if you're right, they may resist just to protect their pride. But if you guide them indirectly, through questions, framing, or subtle cues, they'll often arrive at the same conclusion willingly. Machiavelli would argue that being the obvious source of power can be dangerous. It paints a target on your back. But if others think they're in charge, or at least part of the decision-making, they become invested in your leadership. They feel like collaborators, not subordinates. This builds long-term loyalty and prevents rebellion. In politics, this is classic statecraft. A ruler might give their counselors the illusion of debate while decisions are already made. The council feels valued, even necessary, but the ruler's agenda moves forward unopposed. In business, this could mean letting key employees convince you to make a change that was already your plan. You let them lead the conversation. You validate their ideas. They feel empowered, and they'll execute with more passion because they believe it was their initiative. In personal life, it can be even more delicate. Helping someone reach a difficult realization without confrontation, letting them find the path while you quietly shape the terrain, is a rare and powerful skill. This tactic isn't deceitful for its own sake. It's strategic empathy. It allows you to harness the momentum of others without clashing with them. You gain allies instead of obstacles. You lead without appearing to lead. Machiavelli's brilliance was in seeing how the appearance of power often outweighs its display. When you let others think they hold influence over you, their defenses fall. And while they relax, you guide the game to its conclusion, your conclusion. Power rarely comes with kindness. It comes with calculation. Machiavelli did not believe in fairy tales. In The Prince, he stripped power down to its core elements: ambition, strategy, and ruthless decision-making. One of his most controversial and enduring beliefs is this: power rarely comes with kindness, it comes with calculation. The idea isn't to glorify cruelty, but to acknowledge the raw truth. When power is at stake, kindness alone is often a weakness, not a virtue. This can be difficult to accept, especially for those raised to believe that being fair, generous, and likable would naturally earn respect and leadership. But Machiavelli argues otherwise. He points out that kind rulers are often taken advantage of, seen as soft, and eventually replaced by those willing to make hard choices. Calculating leaders, those who know how to weigh costs, assess human nature, and act decisively, are the ones who survive and thrive. Look at history. Strong empires, companies, and individuals who rose to power did so by outmaneuvering, not outgifting, their rivals. Alexander the Great didn't conquer the known world by being nice. He did it by calculating when to strike, whom to eliminate, and how to inspire fear and loyalty at the same time. Kindness had a place, but only when it served a larger goal. Machiavelli warns that if you try to be loved above all else, you set yourself up for failure. Why? Because people are fickle. They change. They forget your kindness when it's no longer convenient. They take advantage of leniency. In contrast, someone who leads with clear boundaries, firm decisions, and a reputation for strength is less likely to be challenged. This doesn't mean kindness should be abandoned. Rather, it must be used with intent, not thrown around carelessly. Machiavelli advises that if you must choose between being feared and loved, choose fear because it's more reliable. People may love you today and betray you tomorrow, but fear keeps them in check, especially when ambition or greed tempts them to act out. In modern terms, think of this in the workplace. A leader who's overly friendly may struggle to fire underperformers, demand excellence, or draw hard lines in negotiation. Meanwhile, a leader who knows how to blend emotional intelligence with firm expectations earns long-term respect, even if not everyone likes them at first. For those in their 40s, 50s, and beyond, this idea often resonates more deeply. Life teaches that power is not handed to the kind-hearted. It's earned, defended, and sometimes wrestled from others. The trick is to recognize when kindness is a strategy and when it's a liability. Kindness makes you approachable. Calculation makes you untouchable. Machiavelli would say, "Be both when you must, but never be kind at the expense of power." Let morality guide others. Strategy guides you. One of Machiavelli's most piercing observations is this: let morality guide the masses. Strategy should guide the ruler. In other words, while people should be allowed to believe in right and wrong, a leader must make decisions based not on what's moral, but on what's effective. It's not that Machiavelli hated morality. He simply believed that power and survival required different rules. The average person is taught from childhood to follow certain moral codes. Be honest, be fair, treat others as you'd like to be treated. These values help society function. But in Machiavelli's view, a ruler who plays by the same rules as the people he governs puts himself at a dangerous disadvantage. Why? Because enemies don't care about your morality. They care about your weakness. Strategy, on the other hand, asks a very different question. Not what is right, but what works. And in a chaotic, unpredictable world, it's often the strategist, not the moralist, who survives. Machiavelli praises leaders who pretend to be moral, because that earns trust, but who act based on cold logic behind the scenes. Take, for example, the actions of Roman emperors or Renaissance princes. They often upheld religion and ethics in public, even as they orchestrated assassinations, betrayals, and takeovers in private. The people saw virtue. The leaders saw opportunity. This divide between public morality and private strategy is something many in their 40s and 50s understand well. You've lived through office politics, power struggles, and high-stakes decisions. You've seen how doing the right thing doesn't always get results, and how those who win often do so by playing a different game, one that rewards intelligence, not virtue. Machiavelli's advice is to let others hold the moral torch. Let them argue over what's just and fair. Meanwhile, you watch, plan, and move when the time is right. It's not about being evil. It's about being effective. A moral leader may go down with the ship because they refuse to lie. A strategic leader will quietly steer the ship to safety, even if it means deceiving the crew. In today's world, this might look like a CEO who makes painful layoffs to save a company long-term, or a political leader who compromises values publicly to win a greater battle later. These choices aren't made to feel good, they're made to win, and sometimes that's the only way forward. Machiavelli wouldn't tell you to be heartless. He would tell you to be smart, to understand that while morality sounds noble, strategy builds empires. And if you're the one making decisions that affect others, you have a duty to be strategic, even when it feels uncomfortable. So let the world chase virtue. You chase victory. Let morality guide them. Let strategy guide you. People forget pain when they feel progress. Machiavelli understood something modern leaders still forget. People are far more tolerant of hardship when they believe it's leading somewhere. When individuals or societies sense progress, they will endure discomfort, sacrifice, and even suffering, because progress gives pain a purpose. But when pain feels aimless, when there's no light at the end of the tunnel, they rebel, lose faith, or collapse into despair. This principle has been proven time and time again throughout history. Leaders who survive turbulent periods don't always do so by sparing people from difficulty. They do it by framing difficulty as a step forward. The trick is not to eliminate suffering, but to give it meaning. Let's look at Franklin D. Roosevelt during the Great Depression. When the U.S. was reeling from unemployment and poverty, FDR didn't promise instant relief. Instead, he launched the New Deal, programs that didn't fix everything overnight, but showed movement. People still struggled, but they saw roads being built, public works taking shape, hope being rekindled. They endured the pain because it felt like part of a journey toward a better future. Machiavelli would argue that this isn't just good policy, it's good control. Because when people see momentum, they shift focus from what they're losing to what they might gain. The narrative changes from "I'm hurting" to "I'm growing." Smart leaders harness this psychology. They break large, painful transitions into small, visible wins. Instead of overwhelming people with the full scale of change, they show small, consistent steps forward. Each win becomes a painkiller. Each bit of progress becomes a promise that the sacrifice is worth it. In a business context, consider layoffs. When companies cut jobs without explanation or vision, morale collapses. But if leadership ties that pain to a visible transformation, like a pivot to innovation, new market growth, or long-term sustainability, people are more likely to endure it. They may not like it, but they understand it. This is why vision matters, not as a cliché, but as a psychological anchor. A compelling vision turns hardship into investment. Without vision, hardship feels like theft. Even in personal relationships or family life, this applies. Parents often ask children to sacrifice, to study instead of play, to move to a new city, to obey unfamiliar rules. But when those sacrifices are tied to progress, education, opportunities, growth, they're more likely to be accepted. The discomfort fades when the gain is clear. The mature individual, especially those aged 40 to 60, knows this firsthand. You've endured career transitions, health scares, financial strain, and emotional challenges. But when those struggles led to growth, new roles, stronger relationships, deeper self-knowledge, you forgot the pain. Or at least you learned to live with it, because it served something. Machiavelli's brilliance was recognizing that leadership isn't about removing pain. It's about reframing it. When people feel they're moving forward, they'll keep walking, even through fire. Your job isn't to protect them from discomfort. It's to give that discomfort meaning. If they believe in the path, they'll follow, even when it hurts. Turn enemies into examples. Few Machiavellian lessons strike with as much clarity and cold logic as this one. Don't just defeat your enemies, turn them into examples. Why? Because raw victory is temporary, but a message lasts. When a rival challenges your authority, it's not just a personal threat, it's a test of your credibility. If others are watching, and they always are, how you respond determines whether future challengers will rise or fall silent. Machiavelli doesn't advocate cruelty for cruelty's sake. He advocates strategic consequence. If someone threatens your position or undermines your rule, let your response send a clear message to everyone else. This is what happens when you cross me. This isn't about overreacting or being reckless. It's about precision. A well-executed example creates deterrence. It doesn't require a body count, just clarity. In The Prince, Machiavelli recounts how Cesare Borgia dealt with a corrupt lieutenant who abused his power. Borgia had him publicly executed in a brutal but symbolic fashion, not out of rage, but to show the people that he wouldn't tolerate abuse under his command. It wasn't just punishment, it was performance. The key is visibility. If you deal with enemies quietly or forgive them without consequence, others may interpret that as weakness. But if your action is visible, decisive, and unambiguous, it becomes legend. It echoes. In business, this takes different forms. When a high-level executive publicly defies the CEO or undermines the company's direction and is swiftly removed with cause, others take note. The decision doesn't just resolve a personnel issue. It sends a message to the entire organization. This is the boundary. The example regulates behavior better than any memo. In politics, we see this constantly. Leaders prosecute rivals, exile dissidents, or call out corruption, not always just to address a wrong, but to show others what happens when lines are crossed. Even in diplomacy, countries impose sanctions, not necessarily to destroy an enemy, but to send a message. Our interests will be defended. Even in everyday life, especially by midlife, you learn this dynamic. If someone disrespects your boundaries and you let it slide, they often repeat it. But if you respond clearly, whether through confrontation, distance, or a consequence, you teach them and everyone watching what your limits are. This strategy doesn't mean being vengeful, it means being deliberate. Choose your moments carefully. Not every enemy needs to be crushed, but the right one, handled at the right time, in the right way, becomes a story others remember. And here's the deeper layer. Once you've made the example, move on. Don't dwell. Don't turn it into a feud. The power of this tactic is in its sharpness and finality. It shows that you're not to be crossed, not because you're cruel, but because you're in control. Machiavelli would say, one public example can prevent a dozen silent betrayals. Don't waste it. Use it wisely, make it visible, and then return to business as usual. The silence that follows? That's respect, or fear, or both. Either way, it protects your power. Surround yourself with those you can control, not those you admire. Machiavelli's view of leadership is clear. Admiration is a luxury, but control is a necessity. Many leaders fall into the trap of surrounding themselves with people they admire, brilliant minds, charismatic figures, or impressive talents. But Machiavelli warns that doing so can be dangerous. Why? Because admiration often blinds us to threat. If you cannot control the people around you, you risk being controlled by them. To Machiavelli, power must be centralized in the hands of the prince, or the leader. That power is diluted when those in your circle become too influential, too independent, or too self-interested. Admiration, while emotionally satisfying, can cloud your judgment. It can make you overlook signs of ambition, disloyalty, or manipulation. And once you lose control of your inner circle, your downfall begins from within. Let's consider historical examples. Julius Caesar surrounded himself with brilliant men, one of whom was Brutus, his eventual assassin. Caesar admired Brutus for his ideals and intellect, but that very admiration made him underestimate Brutus's potential threat. If Caesar had surrounded himself with loyalists rather than equals, history might have turned out differently. Machiavelli isn't telling you to fill your ranks with fools, he's telling you to prioritize manageability over genius. A leader's inner circle should be comprised of those who are competent but loyal, capable but dependent on the leader's favor for their continued success. That dependency creates alignment. When people owe their position to you, they are far less likely to undermine you. In today's context, think about business leadership. A CEO may be tempted to hire industry stars with big reputations and strong opinions. But if those stars begin to challenge the CEO's authority or drift from the company vision, their presence becomes disruptive. Contrast that with a team of high performers who share your mission, rely on your leadership, and trust your direction. They don't just work for you, they amplify you. Even in personal relationships, this principle applies. Friends, advisors, or partners who dazzle you with intellect or charm may eventually feel entitled to challenge your decisions. But those who value your leadership and whose interests are tied to your success tend to support you, even in hard times. This lesson is especially valuable to people in their 40s to 60s. At this stage of life, many have learned that admiration fades when interests clash, that the people you once looked up to may not have had your best interests at heart, and that keeping influence over your closest allies is not selfish, it's strategic. Surrounding yourself with controllable allies doesn't mean building a circle of sycophants. It means building a team where you remain the axis of decision-making. You should always be the most powerful person in your circle, not the most impressed. When admiration clouds authority, control disappears. Machiavelli understood a strong leader can respect others, but they must never depend on anyone they cannot command. Act decisively, even if wrongly. Hesitation invites defeat. Machiavelli's philosophy on action is grounded in the brutal tempo of power. Those who hesitate lose. In a world full of uncertainty, he believed it was better to act decisively, even if the action turns out to be wrong, than to delay and be consumed by indecision. Inaction, to Machiavelli, was not safety. It was invitation to defeat. Why? Because hesitation projects weakness. It shows others that you're uncertain, vulnerable, and easily overwhelmed. That perception spreads fast, among enemies, allies, even your own supporters. And once people begin to doubt your ability to decide, they stop looking to you for leadership. Decisiveness, on the other hand, radiates strength. It builds momentum, inspires confidence, and puts your enemies on the defensive. Even if your decision isn't perfect, people respond to conviction. They'd rather follow a bold leader with a flawed plan than a timid one with a perfect theory still stuck on the drawing board. Machiavelli wrote, "The wise man does at once what the fool does finally." In other words, delay doesn't make you smarter. It just makes you slower. And in the realm of power, timing is everything. This principle echoes through history. In battle, generals who moved swiftly often won, even when they lacked full information. In politics, candidates who controlled the narrative early gained support, even before all facts emerged. In business, the companies that acted on trends rather than studied them to death were the ones that shaped markets, not followed them. Think about your own life. How many opportunities were lost to overthinking? How many moments slipped away because you needed just a little more time? The truth is, perfect information rarely exists, and by the time you have it, the window may have closed. Machiavelli isn't suggesting you act recklessly. He's saying you must commit and live with the consequences. Even a wrong move can be corrected. But no move? That's irrecoverable. And there's a deeper layer to this. Decisive action has a psychological impact on others. When you act with certainty, people assume you know something they don't. They begin to second-guess themselves. Even your enemies might hesitate, giving you the upper hand, not because you outsmarted them, but because you moved before they did. This lesson hits especially hard for those between 40 and 60. You've likely faced key decisions, career changes, business moves, personal crossroads, where the temptation to wait felt safer. But with experience comes the knowledge that clarity doesn't come from delay. It comes from action. The world doesn't wait for the perfect decision. It reacts to the first one. So, take the shot. Make the call. Even if it's wrong, you'll be in motion. You can adjust, redirect, recover. But if you hesitate, someone else will act. And in Machiavelli's world, the second actor is already at a disadvantage. Hesitation may feel like control, but in power, it's just a pause before being overtaken. When you win, rewrite history in your favor. Machiavelli understood something that modern leaders, politicians, and power players still use today. History is not what happened, it's what people believe happened. And if you've come out on top, your first priority should be to shape the story of that victory so it serves your future. Because raw victory isn't enough. What matters is the narrative that survives. After a win, whether it's in politics, business, war, or personal life, people begin searching for meaning. How did this happen? Who was right? Who was wise? Who was justified? This is your moment to act. You control the script. If you're silent, others, rivals, critics, even followers, will fill in the blanks, and they may turn your victory into a fluke into a fraud, or a success into scandal. Machiavelli would argue that the winner has the moral right to author the myth. And why not? After all, the victors are the ones writing the books, giving the speeches, shaping the institutions. If you don't define your win, someone else will redefine it against you. Look at historical empires. Rome didn't just conquer, they rewrote culture. Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon and sparked civil war, yet was remembered as a reformer and visionary. Napoleon crowned himself emperor and devastated Europe, but shaped his legacy as the man who brought order after chaos. Even in modern times, politicians who win elections quickly revise past failures, align themselves with successful movements, and cast their critics as villains of history. This tactic is just as powerful in personal life. After a successful divorce negotiation, career change, or hard-fought promotion, how you explain what happened to others, and to yourself, determines whether your reputation grows stronger or weaker. If you frame your past as a learning arc that proves your insight, patience, or moral strength, your victory becomes an origin story, not just a result. Rewriting history also works as a defensive move. It protects you from future attacks. If you have embedded your version of events in the minds of others, it becomes difficult for rivals to challenge it without sounding bitter or revisionist. Your version becomes the default truth, and the truth, once settled, is hard to uproot. But Machiavelli would warn, don't make your rewriting obvious. Be subtle. Include truths, but omit or reshape the most dangerous parts. Control the narrative by controlling the language. Use symbols, rituals, titles. Associate your win with a cause greater than yourself: reform, justice, progress. This makes your version harder to challenge, because now people are defending not just your actions, but an entire ideal tied to them. Winning is step one. Owning the story of that win, that's where lasting power is forged. Forgiveness can be a tactic, but rarely a principle. In Machiavellian thinking, forgiveness isn't a virtue, it's a tool. A tactic used only when it serves a greater strategic aim. If you forgive out of compassion alone, you're signaling weakness. But if you forgive to neutralize a threat, to win loyalty, or to create a trap, now you're thinking like a prince. Let's look deeper. What does forgiveness actually do in a power context? It lowers tension. It shifts perception. It gives the forgiven a second chance, but also binds them to you with unspoken debt. And that's the leverage Machiavelli prized. When you forgive someone strategically, they often become more loyal, more grateful, and more cautious. Why? Because they know they got a rare second chance, and they fear pushing their luck. But here's where the balance matters. If you forgive too often, you teach people there are no consequences. You invite more betrayal. People will test your boundaries, knowing your principles tie your hands. That's why Machiavelli cautioned leaders to use mercy carefully and rarely. One dramatic act of forgiveness can secure allies. A pattern of it destroys discipline and invites risk. Now consider how this shows up in modern life. A manager forgives a disloyal subordinate to avoid workplace drama, but now that subordinate knows there's no teeth behind the boss's authority. A partner excuses betrayal in the name of peace, but creates a dynamic where their boundaries are always negotiable. Machiavelli wouldn't call for vengeance every time, but he'd recommend calculating the cost and value of forgiveness. Does letting this person off the hook make others more obedient or less? Does it secure their allegiance or encourage further rebellion? If it doesn't serve the system of control, it's not forgiveness, it's self-sabotage. There's also the timing of forgiveness. Sometimes it's best done publicly to show that you're magnanimous and in control. Other times it should be private, so it becomes a quiet power exchange. I saved you. You owe me. Either way, it must be staged deliberately. Never emotional, never reactive. And Machiavelli would urge you to never forget, even if you forgive. True forgiveness in leadership isn't forgetting. It's watching, waiting, using the past as context for future moves. Trust, once broken, doesn't get restored, it gets managed. So forgive when it's useful. When it solidifies your power, extends your influence, or gives you a leash on someone who would otherwise be lost. But don't turn it into a principle, because in a world built on power, principle without control leads to your downfall. Appear humble after victory. It disarms envy. Envy is one of the most corrosive forces in any hierarchy, and Machiavelli knew that nothing draws envy like success, especially when that success seems effortless or overwhelming. So, after you win, after you've achieved the goal or risen above your peers, the smartest move you can make is to appear humble. Why? Because people will tolerate power, but they despise arrogance. They'll follow strength, but they'll secretly work against someone who flaunts it. When you project humility after success, you don't shrink yourself. You disarm their resentment. You make them feel like you haven't left them behind, like your win doesn't threaten their own value. Machiavelli observed that many rulers fell not because they were weak, but because they were hated. And they were hated because they seemed untouchable, indifferent, or too proud. The moment others feel your success has made you unreachable, they begin plotting your fall. But if you seem grateful, grounded, and even a little vulnerable, they relax. They let you keep your crown because they think you don't know how much it shines. In today's world, this lesson is everywhere. A CEO who boasts in interviews may draw shareholders' admiration, but also invites employee resentment and media scrutiny. A politician who wins and gloats creates opposition movements overnight, but the one who speaks of service, team effort, and being lucky to have support, they get a second term. And here's the twist. This humility doesn't have to be genuine. Machiavelli would say it rarely is. It just has to look genuine. Publicly thank your rivals. Share credit. Downplay your ambition. Let others think they had a hand in your win. Smile, defer, and all the while keep your grip on the real reins of power. This tactic works particularly well for those in midlife leadership. By age 40 or 50, you've likely accumulated real achievements and also real rivals. The temptation to show how far you've come, how hard you've worked, or how much better you are is strong, but it's also dangerous. The people watching may nod on the surface, but underneath, they're building resentment. So use humility not as a virtue, but as camouflage. The quieter your celebration, the longer your reign. Make them believe they need you more than you need them. Dependence is power. And one of Machiavelli's most enduring lessons is this: to maintain dominance in any relationship, structure it so that they believe they can't afford to lose you, even if you can't afford to lose them. This isn't about arrogance. It's about leverage. When someone thinks they rely on you for stability, results, insight, protection, or access, they'll treat you with caution. They'll hesitate to oppose you. And more importantly, they'll work to preserve the relationship, often giving you more than you demand. But the key lies in perception. People don't need to actually depend on you. They just need to believe they do. And Machiavelli would advise you to build this belief slowly and subtly. Make yourself seem essential. Solve problems only you can solve. Deliver results no one else offers. Become a gatekeeper to something they value, then quietly remind them of that role. This is standard practice in business and politics. Consultants, advisors, and executives often carve out niches of indispensability, positioning themselves as too embedded to remove. Smart lawyers, for example, don't just represent clients, they become confidants. Strategic allies. The client begins to believe that losing them would mean chaos, confusion, or defeat. Once that belief sets in, you hold the power. Machiavelli would also say, never reveal how much you don't need them, because as soon as they know you can walk away, they'll start preparing for it. They'll test you, challenge you, try to reduce their dependence. So keep your independence hidden. Make it seem like you're equally invested, maybe even more so. But behind the scenes, build your options, your own sources of power, your exit routes. That way, if you ever do need to pull away, you do so from a position of unshakable strength. This tactic is powerful in personal relationships too. In friendships, partnerships, or marriages, perceived dependence can shape the dynamic. If you're always the one compromising, chasing, or pleasing, you've lost leverage. But if the other person starts to believe you are the emotional center, the one who holds it all together, they begin to act with more care. And for those in their 40s or 50s, this idea carries added weight. You've likely built skills, knowledge, and networks over decades. Now is the time to structure those into invisible leverage. Let others lean on you. Just don't let them see how much freedom you truly have. Because when they believe they need you more than you need them, they'll protect your position for you. That's not just influence. That's control.